What if the ground beneath your feet learned the way your lungs move and kept breathing without you when you walked away? Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. From a grave that inhales at 12:17 to voices that rise where there should be only soil, every moment tightens the clock and tests a choice. Which moment chilled you most? Tell me in the comments. Story 1. The grave that kept breathing at midnight. I will never forget the first time I saw the earth breathe. Not leaves moving, not fog rolling, but honest-to-God ribs under the sod, lifting slow, dropping slower, as if the grave had lungs and I had wandered into its bedroom at midnight. I know how that sounds, but listen, because if you ever work nights in a cemetery, you learn that some things exhale when no one else is awake. The night was clear and thin, the kind of cold that needles the nose, even in June. Every step crushed damp grass and released that mix of iodine and wet leaves that clings to old stones. I was on the clock, literally, because the company started doing spot audits after a groundskeeper at a different site got caught napping. My job meant my sister kept her medication and I kept a roof, so I wore the anxiety like a second jacket, zipped to the throat. They assigned me to Hillcrest, the oldest part, where angels lean with broken faces and names were down to rumors. My punch-in was 11:47, and I logged a sweep around row D. The pocket watch I used was a leftover from Old Man Sutter, who trained me, a brass thing with a cracked crystal that stopped at exactly 12:17. He said it was dead, but it felt right in my hand, solid, stubborn, like a promise or a lie. The first hint was not the sound, but the silence. The road beyond the stone wall lost its distant hum. Crickets clamped their little saws shut. The air pressed close and held itself, the way a room does when someone has just whispered a secret and you were not meant to hear. That was when I heard it, not a moan, not a hiss, but a breath, rough as a hospital ventilator, drawing in just under my boots. Plot D. 17 lay under what used to be a sycamore. The stump had a ring of frost around it, a pale collar even in summer, and I told myself it was a trick of shade. The headstone had a triangle of pebbles stacked in one corner, neat and small, like someone naming a shape in math class. I wrote it in my notebook because I was supposed to notice vandalism, but the note I wrote was just 3 dots. I did not want to name what I felt looking at those stones. The soil rose a thumb's width and fell. I crouched and put my palm flat and felt a slow lift, then a waiting, then a slow release. I said it out loud, for the audit camera, for my own list of excuses. Gas pockets, I told the air. Old coffins crack, methane collects, find a way up. I wanted it to be science I could mop up and write a report about. The breath answered by fogging the watch crystal in my hand. At exactly 12:17, the second hand that was forever stuck twitched, then quit. The fog on the crystal had traced a crescent shape and left 3 points like the triangle on the stone. I wiped it and laughed because that is what you do when your nerves bark, but the laugh came back to me through the ground in a lower pitch, my own sound traveling the other way. I checked for a culvert. In Hillcrest, there are storm drains older than my grandmother. Sometimes they whistle. I swung my flashlight along the path and caught the angel statue near the old gate, the one with its face chipped smooth, mouth missing like someone had thumbed it out of wet clay. The cavity was dark and hollow and too round. The smell of iodine and leaves gusted from it like breath blown wrong. The radio on my hip chirped and cut. The gate motor whined and then clicked shut, the way it does when the timer cycles. I swore and tried my phone, but the battery plummeted from 30% to 5 in a heartbeat, then went black. The audit app was dead. The world narrowed to my steps, and the whisper of the ventilator beneath me, steady and patient and almost familiar. I went back to D17 with a bench scraper in my hand. It is not a weapon, but it made me braver to hold something shiny. The frost ring was wider, licking the edges of the plot like a tongue testing a tooth. The triangle of pebbles sat there stupid and small, and I told myself I would move one to prove something simple. If the soil was swelling through some vent, the tiniest change would do nothing, and I could tell the camera, see, not supernatural, just drainage. I picked up the bottom pebble and set on the headstone. The breath paused. In that pause, I heard everything I usually ignore, The beads and the poplar leaves, the tiny creep of ants, my own pulse knocking at the gates of my throat. Then the breath continued, slower, deeper, and with the second exhale, it matched my cough. I coughed because cold air does that to me, and the earth under me coughed back with my rhythm, just a hair out of sync. I should have put the pebble back exactly where it had been. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing you would tell me to do from your couch with the lights on. Curiosity is not a sin, but it is a hinge, and I leaned my weight on it. I moved the second pebble, and the frost climbed my boots and made the leather squeal. Somewhere to my left, the angel's hollow rang like a bottle when you blow across it. The pocket watch ticked. It had not ticked in years, but now it did, faint and stubborn. Each click a footstep on wet stone. 12:17 glowed in my mind like an address. I held the watch to my ear, and the breath fogged the crystal again, and in the fog my name wrote itself, 3 letters quick and shy, like a prank in a bathroom mirror. I wiped it and said, "Stop it," to the night, to myself, to whatever was patient enough to wait for me to be foolish. When the power flickered on at the gate, it was only to throw the last of the light into the fog. Beyond the wall, the road was gone, just a lighter shade of gray. I called Sutter on the radio again and heard my own voice reply from the ground as a grainy echo, like I had left a version of myself down there I did not remember losing. The angel's hollow breathed back, a little wetter now, as if the mouth it borrowed had lips. I wanted a reason I could file. Methane makes sense. A storm drain would make sense too. I remembered the old blueprints in the shed and told myself a culvert ran under row D. I told myself that until I believed it for a minute. Then the watch crystal misted and showed the triangle again, but this time the lower corner was missing. My hand shook. The breath beneath me hit that same missing beat and then tried to copy me when I steadied. I went to the angel because the hollow felt like a question. The missing mouth was smooth and round, and cold air poured through it, as if the statue were the only fresh thing in the entire cemetery. I leaned close and said my name, soft, the way you say it to yourself when you're trying to prove you are real. The ground under D, 17, answered with my name, the vowels stretched and torn by soil. It did not feel like hearing. It felt like being heard. The keys fell from my jacket pocket when I flinched. They rang against the statue and skittered into the drain by the path where the cover has been broken for years. I went flat on my stomach and reached, but felt only slime and pebble grit. The sound of the keys settling echoed far below, as if the drain were longer, deeper, or angrier than it had any right to be. The world tilted. Every safe exit slid away from me one by one. I sat up because sitting up is sometimes a victory. The radio was dead. The phone was dead. The gate was locked against a fog that was more wall than weather. In a half circle of my flashlight beam, the triangle of pebbles on the headstone looked wrong. I could not remember which corner had been which. It is a dumb detail, but when your life squeezes into a pinhole, the dumb details are all you have. I told the statue I would put the stones back. I said it the way you say sorry to an empty room, just in case someone is listening. I picked up the 2 pebbles I had moved and tried to reverse my mistake. The breath under the grave grew quicker, as if expecting, as if the one thing it needed was the one thing I might choose wrong. I did choose wrong. The pebble clicked down in the top corner, and a frost line crawled 2 feet in a blink. A red herring is comfort with a better name. I clung to the idea of a buried drain because it made time move again. I imagined a short tunnel taking the wind down under the plot and back up through the angel. I pictured leaves rattling at the mouth. I wound the image until it purred. Then I checked the base of the statue and found soil packed into the seams the way mud packs under fingernails, and the hollow smelled not like a drain, but like someone else's breath behind your ear. At 12:17, the watch ticked hard enough to shiver the hand. The crystal fogged from the inside this time. On it, in a half-moon smudge, my name wrote itself again. The O was a perfect circle. The triangle of points bloomed around it. That was not wind. That was not methane. That was a whisper I used to hear when my lungs locked up as a kid. The slow hiss of a machine teaching me to breathe, coming now from the ground where breath should be what ends. I said a bad word and the ground said it back, half laughing, half drowning. The angel's hollow warmed, which should not happen to stone. I understood then what the pebbles were trying to tell me. 3 points make a metronome. You take one away, the rhythm changes. You put it back wrong. The measure is broken and the song does not know how to end. The cemetery was not a place where the dead rest. It was a place where breath is counted. I could have run for the wall. I could have climbed it and shredded my palms and let the audit fail and let the job go and let my sister find a cheaper pharmacy somehow. Choice is only clean when there is no one else attached to you. I did not run. I stayed and made the only bargain I thought a place like this might respect. If the dead needed a pattern to find their way, I would give them mine and ask for the gate to open before they could follow. I put my mouth to the angel's hollow. The cold was a nail to the gums. My own breath felt thin and expensive. I exhaled slow, the way the therapist taught me when I was 10 and afraid to sleep. The hollow drank it. The soil under D17 rose in one deep swell, then settled in a shape that made me think of ribs slumping after a sigh. The watch in my hand began to tick like a tiny heart without a body. The lights at the gate flickered twice and steadied. Somewhere beyond the fog, a truck shifted gears. My hand shook so hard the watch face rattled. On the crystal, the triangle appeared again, all 3 points this time, but not in the corner. They sat right over the center where the hands would cross. They were not warning me. They were marking something they had taken. The ground made a sound I still hear in the hum of my refrigerator at night. It was the sound of dirt deciding. The frost line retreated as if the grave inhaled and held. Then the angel's hollow hissed back my own breath, a perfect loop, my rhythm, my flaw, my old childhood wheeze, now coming from stone and soil like I had recorded myself, and the cemetery was pressing play. The earth near the headstone sank a fraction, a subtle slouch, and in that slouch I saw a shallow network of roots tighten and release like muscle. The place itself was the chest. The statues were the mouths. The pebbles were the counting beads that kept the beat. Sutter's cracked watch was never broken. It was waiting for 12:17 because that was when the cemetery took his breath the first time, and now it had mine. I heard Sutter's voice then, not from the ground, but from memory, telling me to document even the strange so you can swear you did your job. My job, right then, felt like keeping the future if I could. I told the angel I would put the stones right if it let me go. I told the ground I would come back tomorrow night if it left my sister out of this. Bartering with dirt is foolish until it is the only counter that answers. I fixed the triangle by feel, recreating the angle the pebbles had worn into the headstone over years of weather. When the last pebble clicked into the bottom corner where it belonged, the frost ring slowed like a breath held at the top. The watch's ticking softened until it felt less like counting down and more like drifting. I took my mouth from the hollow and tasted metal and moss. The gate thumped. The motor whirred. A thin aisle opened in the fog, just wide enough for a person with a shallow breath and a bad decision to slip through. I stood, and the blood in my legs remembered gravity. I did not run. I walked slow because something in me knew that if I ran, the place would follow and I would teach it a new rhythm I did not want it to learn. I reached the gate and looked back because that is what you do when you think you have made a deal and you want to confirm you are not tricked. The headstone at D17 looked like any other rectangle, worn and patient. The angel looked like any other broken face with a hole where a mouth should be. The frost had drawn back into the dirt and left dark grass that would be dry by noon. It all looked harmless enough, which is another name for hunger with a clean napkin. On the road, my phone blinked a battery icon like a bad eye, and then woke up at 1%. A voicemail appeared from my sister, timestamp 12:18, the minute after the watch started ticking. I pressed play and heard her say my name once real soft. Then there was a breath that matched mine perfectly, and behind it, on the edge of the microphone, 3 tiny clicks like stones tapping glass. The audit app recorded a partial shift and then crashed. I signed my name anyway. Monday would not be kind. I got home before 2 and set the watch on my kitchen table. At 12:17, the next night, it began to tick in the drawer where I had hidden it, like a beetle with a metal shell hunting for a way out. I took it back to the cemetery because that is the shape of the mistake I chose. I do not know if the dead need directions or if the living need to believe they do. I only know that when you stand over D17 at the right moment, the earth breathes like a patient on a machine, and if you listen hard enough, it will copy you. Maybe it is only learning. Maybe it is practicing for a day when you stop. That is how I sleep now. If I sleep with the thought that something with no lungs is rehearsing the way mine move. Last week, a new headstone appeared on row 9. No name yet, just a slab waiting for letters. When I walked by, I heard a fourth click, faint and hopeful, even though there were only 3 pebbles on its corner. I did not look hard at the statue next to it. I did not look at the mouth someone had patched with wet cement, the cement that was already shrinking like a lip about to part. I kept moving because I'm trying not to teach the place any more of my habits. If you visit Hillcrest, do not touch the pebbles. Do not breathe into anything with a face. If your watch stops at 12:17, do not wind it. And if you have to listen, do it with your mouth shut and your hands in your pockets. Some graves keep breathing after the service ends, and some of them are only waiting for you to show them how you do it. Now tell me, would you have moved the pebble back or run for the wall? Story 2. Bells under the frosted ground. The bell rang from beneath the fresh grave and kept ringing, thin and steady, as if someone far below was breathing through iron. I know how stories like that sound. I also know the taste the air gets when metal touches your tongue in winter. It is the same taste I swallowed that night, a rusty iron tang that did not belong to the wind, while the bell's pulse rolled under the snow like a heartbeat that had learned how to echo. My name is Malcolm. I work nights at Ridge Lawn, the old cemetery on the North Ridge, where the wind never seems to forget the hills it crossed. I take double shifts because it is easier to keep moving than to sleep. The company started installing safety bells on the new burials for the ghost of a risk that no one wants to talk about. Most are decorative nods to the past. None are meant to ring at 1:11 in the morning. The cold came off the ground in sheets. You know that dry burn your nostrils get when air feels sharp enough to cut. My lantern threw a circle that turned the snow to crushed glass and the headstones to teeth. Frost formed wild shapes at the base of the marble, reaching up in little spires like the tips of icicles trying to grow backward. The bell on plot F11 made its noise as if it had nowhere else to be, and that felt like the first wrong thing. I had gloves on, the thick kind that hide your fingers from your own pulse, but I could still feel the string under them when I grabbed it. The line ran from the bell over a small iron bracket and down through the white lid we had sealed only yesterday. The string was taut enough to sing. I pulled once to test it, and the bell answered with a higher note like a scared laugh. The taste of iron rose in my mouth again, though I had not bitten my tongue. If you have ever worked in a place that holds its own weather, you know when the normal rules are about to give. It starts as a quiet that presses at your ears. The frost around F11 had a rusty stain smudged into it like someone had rubbed dirty hands in a circle. I told myself it was runoff from the bracket. It will always be easier to tell yourself that. My lantern flame twitched toward the ground as if the bell were a magnet for the heat. Unknown before danger. A lesson you learn the hard way. I noticed the strangest thing only after the bell had been ringing for 5 minutes. At the edges of the plot, tiny ice spurs were rising from the soil toward the air, growing upward like little clear thorns. Icicles are meant to point down. These pointed up, sharp as needles, angled toward the bell as if drawn by sound. I counted 11 before I made myself stop. They kept growing while I tried not to stare. You might ask why I did not just call someone. The radio on my jacket crackled with the storm that was rolling from the hills. Static came in thick as wool. My phone sat black in my pocket because the cold drinks batteries like it is owed. Somewhere beyond the wall, the plows had stopped. I could feel the road closing in my bones, the way you can feel a door swinging shut behind you and know it will not open again soon. I do not scare easy, but I do count exits. I leaned close and listened to the bell. The ring was not clean. It had a little tremor at the top of the note, a gnat buzz that rode the sound. I realized after a moment that the buzz lined up with my heart. When my pulse jumped, the bell shivered. When I held my breath to test it, the tone went thin, almost shy, then came back strong when I had to inhale. I told myself that was coincidence. I tell myself what I need to in order to keep working. Records, I thought. If anything had been misfiled, I could at least point to paper. The caretaker's crypt under the chapel holds the ledgers back to 1890. The air under there smells like old glue and cold stone. I wrapped the string around the bell bracket, once to mute the note, and went for the chapel steps. The ringing followed me, which made sense because sound travels, but it kept a distance like a stray dog. Every time I paused, the bell waited and then took 3 soft steps after me. The crypt's door complained when I pushed it. Inside, the frost had stitched gray stitches along the edges of the shelves. I carried the lantern and watched my breath hang close to my face, like it did not want to leave me. On the middle shelf lay the new ledger, still half blank, and underneath it a stack of blueprints we never use except when we need to calm ourselves with lines. The bell's sound seeped through the stone. It did not echo. It soaked in the way a stain soaks in a cloth. I turned pages with stiff fingers until I hit the entries for F row. The new burials were neat. F09, F10, F11, F12, then a pale scrape where F06 should have been. An erasure so careful the paper had thinned to a crinkle. Someone had scraped a name away and written nothing in its place. My stomach made a small, slow drop. The cold found a soft spot in my glove where a seam had split at the web between thumb and forefinger. Beats belonged to clocks and hearts and bells. The bell rang once while I looked at that page, and then rang again, a pair of notes tight as a heartbeat. I set the ledger down. The rusty stain in the snow had not been run off. I think I knew that the second I saw it, but you save the worst truth for last. The air had that iron taste again, and under the shelf a lace of frost had grown inward from the stone floor, reaching, always reaching, like a field of tiny hands that had not learned to stop. I took the old map of burial lines and lightened my lantern. Oil left was less than I wanted. The storm muttered above. This is the part where I should tell you I turned back and waited for morning. I will not lie. I went out because the thought of that bell, ringing with no answer, made a sound that was worse. If you have ever had to prove you are not the kind of man to look away, you know the pull. It does not feel brave. It feels like an order you cannot afford to disobey. Back at F11, the string had tightened enough to cut a groove in the bracket. The up-pointing icicles had grown taller and narrower, all of them leaning toward the bell as if bowing to a note only they could hear. I took out my knife and sawed the string until the bell hung free and the line fell slack into the snow. The bell rang once in protest and then stopped. Relief came like warm water to the scalp. It lasted 2 seconds. The bell rang again with the string cut. Not loud, just enough to say it did not need the string. The sound rolled up through the white, lid like a coin spun on a table that will not fall. My heart kicked and the bell answered. I held my breath until black started to press at the sides of my vision. The bell went thin again, and when I swallowed air, it returned bright as a small star. That was when I stopped believing in pranksters and started believing in patterns. I should explain the crisscross. The safety bells have a habit of getting their lines knotted when a plot gets crowded. We had a tangle at F row last month and ran the wires in a loop to keep them from catching. It was a stupid fix. Tonight, that loop woke up. The bells on F10 and F12 began to answer F11. Half notes that slid in and out like a person trying to find a song they only half remembered. The sound moved along the row and then back again, a patter of small iron feet. The storm closed the world to the length of my arm. The lantern made a halo of the snow, kept trying to swallow. I could not feel the ends of my fingers anymore, only the ache in the knuckle where the cold took my father years ago. He laid out paths in this same ground until a January night reached in and kept more than its share. I did not come to work here to make peace with that. I came because this was the only place my anger knew how to navigate. I followed the bell pattern down to F06 because I knew where that scrape in the ledger would point before I saw the number cut into the stake. The frost around the post had melted and refrozen so many times it looked like glass. In the glass, faint as a mistake, that rusty stain was visible again, not bright, not showy, just enough to bother the eye. The wind paused, listening. The bells held a note between them like a stretch of wire pulled tight by 3 cold hands. I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself it was salt from the trucks. I told myself it was old iron leach from the stakes. I told myself anything I could shape with my mouth. None of it sat right. The string around my wrist started as a practical thing. I had looped a spare line there earlier to carry a bracket. Only when I reached for the spade did I notice that the knot around my wrist had changed. It was a neat little figure 8, a kind my father used to tie snug, precise, impossible to shake off without a deliberate pull. I know how that sounds. I also know the pressure of a decision you cannot reverse. The grave in front of me was not open. The scroll of bells behind me was not softening. The lantern oil was a thin gold line in the glass. I put the spade to the snow at F06 and started to cut squares the way you do when you want to put everything back later and pretend no one has been there. Each square lifted like a lid. The cold climbed my sleeves and made my teeth ache. When the first whisper of thawed soil showed through, the rusty iron taste got stronger. I expected the bell chorus to swell in triumph. It did not. It quieted, interested, the way a room hushes when a key touches a lock. I pulled the squares aside and found the edge of the lid. You can call me reckless. You would be right. But picture a bell ringing below your feet that knows your pulse, and tell me truthfully you would have walked away. The screws came up in a sequence that felt rehearsed. In winter, everything breaks. That night, nothing did. The lid lifted with a tired sigh. Inside the coffin was not a body. There was a coil of string, perfectly wound, as neat as a headache, and tucked inside the coil, a small silver bell like the kind from the old days when they ran a tube to the surface and prayed. The bell had no line on it. It rang once anyway, quiet as a breath in a library. The coil shivered when it did, like the vibration went through it. There was something else in the coil, a strip of leather like a torn cuff. I touched it and found the notch where my father used to slash his gloves to slide a watch through when he needed to check the time without taking his hands out. The notch matched my memory. I could feel the shape of it under my thumb like a bruise. The bells along the row began to toll, 1 by 1, then 2 by 2, then all together in a soft rolling pattern that sounded like rain on an empty house. The tangle of lines we had run last month vibrated along the frost like a web brushing against a fly. The up-pointing icicles along the row leaned further toward the sound. My lantern's flame tilted so far it licked the glass. The taste of iron filled my mouth, not thick, not bloody, just the idea of a cut that is not opened yet. The knot on my wrist tightened. It tightened on its own. I watched it pinch my skin white and then pink. The bells around me pulled the sound into a single tone, like a long inhale. There's a phrase that lives next to panic. It says this is how it happens. No silence. No spotlight. Just the moment when you see the pattern and know what part you play. I cut the line on my wrist with a knife. The cut was clean. The end of the string fell away and struck the lid with a small, neat tap. The bell in the coil rang and answered though no line touched it. F11's bell answered, then F10, then F12. The sound moved over me and through me like cold water through wool. I said my father's name. I said it into the hollow the coffin left in the air. The lid of F06 tilted and the frost around the grave cracked in a circle. Nothing climbed out. The bells kept ringing. Not wild, not angry, patient. The kind of patience you hear in someone who knows the steps and has time to show you if you ask. I do not know what I expected to find. I don't know what I found instead. I found a place that had learned to call for a replacement when a borrowed soul went missing. You can argue with me about souls. You can tell me that is not a word that belongs in a mouth like mine. Fine. Choose another word. Breaths. Patterns. Whatever you like. The fact stayed where it was. The bells had not been waiting to save a living person who woke up too soon. They were arranged to reach a living person when a quiet ledger somewhere noticed a small debt. F06 was empty. F06 was owed. I understood that at the same time, I understood why the knot on my wrist had been so neat. Choice is clean only until it is not. I could have hammered the lid shut and buried the thought beneath the squares I had cut. I could have walked to the chapel, and slept upright against the door until morning grudged its way over the ridge. Instead, I put the coil in my hands. It weighed almost nothing. The bell in its center kept twitching like a small animal dreaming. When I lifted it, the strings along the row sang a single, bright, painless note, and the up-pointing icicles cracked and grew a fraction taller. I tried to speak above the ring. My voice came out flat, as if the sound around me had been laid like a blanket over my words. I told the air I would not go where my father went. I told the bells my father could keep whatever he had bargained for if it meant I could finish this winter with my hands still attached to my wrists. The only answer was the pattern, the one I had been part of since the moment the line had looped my pulse. A red herring lives where fear wants a friend. Earlier, I had told myself kids had pranked the lines. That idea went brittle and snapped. I cut another string in the loop at F10 for the satisfaction and watched the bell keep time with me anyway. The bells were not using the strings to move. The strings were using the bells to count. I could feel the count getting tighter, a narrowing spiral. I did the one foolish thing that felt like an action. I put the coil back in the coffin and spoke directly to the empty space. "Let him go," I said. I expected silence. Like I was a change in breath. The ring thinned, widened, thinned again, like a chest tried to settle on a pace. My lantern dimmed and then steadied. The frost at the edges of the grave lifted in a brittle canvas and fell back. In that falling, the rusty stains spread 2 inches outward as if something underneath had sighed. I closed my eyes because the moment felt like a thing that would look different if I tried to stare at it too hard. I imagined my father walking the ridge in a storm with no lantern and the wrong gloves. I imagined him seeing the bells as a way to call up and not knowing what was about to answer. I imagined the same pattern finding me, because I will always follow a sound that asks for a hand. When I opened my eyes, the knot around my wrist was gone, not cut, not untied, just gone. The skin bore a ring of cold where it had been. On the coffin lid a single flake of frost stood upright, thin as a pin. The bells surged all at once. A cascade like beads poured from a jar, each note striking and rolling and catching the next. The sound lifted snow dust into the air and made it dance in the lantern light. The up-pointing icicles shivered and shed little shrapnels that pinged against the metal brackets. The coil in the coffin turned 1/4 on its own. The silver bell inside it turned too. I felt the hairs on my forearms go stiff, and the iron taste came back, patient and sure. There's a trick to leaving a place without turning your back on it. You walk sideways and pretend you are not measuring distance. I put the lid down. I set the screws in a pocket I would not remember later. I placed the snow squares back, more carefully than I took them up. The bells did not stop. They gentled. That is when I understood how a net must feel when something swims into it. Not triumph, not malice, just a change in tension that means soon the surface will be different. I made it to the chapel. The door took my weight. The lantern oil surrendered at last in a little sigh. In the dark, the bells sounded farther away, but they did not lose me. They stayed matched to the small tremor I could not deny in the soft underbeat of my heart. I would like to tell you I slept. I did not. I listened to the storm and the bells talk to each other until the east went from black to charcoal to a color like a throat thinking about a word. At dawn, the road opened. The men who arrived found my shovel where I had leaned it. They found my tracks neat as stitches. They found a line of string severed clean, dangling from the F11 bracket, and a second line in the snow that went nowhere. They found a knot ring printed on my wrist when I peeled off my glove to light a cigarette with hands that would not stop shaking. They found no coil because I had put it back, and they found the bells quiet at last, as if they had never learned my name. Later that morning, someone asked if I had heard anything odd in the night. I said no, because the truth felt like a bell that would ring forever if I touched it. The ledger stayed scraped at F06. No one wrote a name there. The blueprints under the shelves curled in the damp like something tried to climb off of paper. In the afternoon, the frost in F row melted and refroze in little ribs. And when the sun hit the ribs, a faint ring rose out of them and went nowhere. This is the part where I tell you the lesson. I do not have one you will like. If you ever hear a bell under snow, listen for the little tremor at the top of the note. If it matches your own pulse, walk away without letting your breath change. Do not cut strings to feel brave. Do not follow sound into places that remember your family. If you can taste iron before you see any metal, keep your hands where they are. The bells call up, but not for the reason you think. Sometimes when the night is quiet enough, I can feel a light weight at my wrist where no string sits. I tell myself it is a memory of pressure. I tell myself a lot of things. Once in the shed, I heard a bell ring twice just above the floorboards, and the frost outside wrote 3 tiny ribs in the snow and then erased them. It is easier to work when you pretend that means nothing. Maybe that is the only lesson. Pretend how you need to until the ground pretends you are not there. In spring, kids will come to the ridge and look for old stories in the stones. They will see the brackets and ask about the bells, and we will tell them the history, the colorful details, the Victorian fear. We will not tell them about the pattern that learned to count. We will not say the word replacement. We will polish the brackets so they look like safety. We will throw salt on the paths and call the orange stain runoff from new iron. We will let the bells be decoration while the frost grows whiter teeth. If you were standing here, I would show you where the up-pointing icicles once grew, thin and happy, tugged toward a note that did not need a string. I would show you the circle of frost that melted twice around F06 and never melted again. If you have ever heard a bell in a place where words are supposed to end, you know the quiet that follows is not peace. It is a pose. I am careful around poses now. I do not like being told where to stand. At sunset, the new burials look most like doors. That is when the air goes iron again and the snow settles and the wires under it cool. The bells do not ring at sunset. They save their breath. When the world is narrowest at night, when lantern oil is a line, not a pool, that is when they practice. If you listen, you will hear a pattern long before you hear a cry. That is the true purpose of a bell under frost. Not to call out, but to call in. Now it is your turn to answer a question. If you had heard that first ring at 111, would you have walked away or dug for a name? Story 3. The caretaker's ledger that filled itself. The first time the ledger wrote by itself, the pen was not even whole. The nib was missing, the shaft cracked, yet ink gathered at the torn reed and spilled into letters I did not want to read. If you have ever heard writing without a writer, the scratch lives in your bones for days. Tonight, I hear it again as I tell you this. The faint rasp moving across paper that is not here, and I wish I had looked away before the first drop of ink lifted its head. My name is Eleanor, night clerk at Brookhaven Memorial. I was wrong, and I say that so you believe me when the details start to lean the wrong way. The old crypt office has a smell you do not forget. When ink left too long in a jar. Mildew from paper that has been thirsty for 50 years. Copper from the radiator that groans once every hour like it is remembering a name. My workstation was a folding table and a flatbed scanner that would not scan if I looked at it wrong. The first stack of ledgers sat to my left, bound in cracked leather, corners chewed by time. Above the boiler, a schoolhouse, clock hung frozen at 3:33, the way it had for as long as anyone still cared to say. I began at midnight because the server backs up at 2. I tell you the hours because the hours matter. At 12:58, the fluorescent light flickered and steadied. At 1:11, the radiator sighed. At 1:33, I found the quill, split and useless, tucked in a canvas wrap with pens that had given up decades ago. I set it down because I liked the look of it next to the scanner, a bit of theater to make a dull job feel earned. At 2:07, I heard writing. Soft, private, the way someone used to write when the person in the next bed was sleeping. There was no one in the room with me. I can swear to that. Yet the sound had weight, a steady drag followed by a tiny lift like breath on the smallest scale. I turned to the ledger on the table and watched glossy black letters form on a page dated for tomorrow. The date was real as a receipt. The ink did not appear all at once. It rose from the paper like steam, then sank into strokes that knew the shape of the alphabet better than some of the living do. A name followed. First the supervisor's last name, then his first. Some part of me waited for a joke. We have a groundsman who thinks he is a prankster. He oils hinges he knows I will walk through and claims victory when they do not squeal. This was not him. The pen lay as I had left it, broken and dry. The clock stayed mute at 3:33. The air felt thick with humidity the radiator could not explain. A smear hung beside the line of a new entry, 5 oval dots the size and place of fingerprints. I noticed their shape because noticing shapes is the only tool I have when fear starts looking for a handle. Unknown before danger. The first wrong thing needs to be small so you can miss it and pretend the second wrong thing is the first. Water stains ran down the right margin of the ledger page, a drift of pale, spreading lines like a tiny map revering into a pond. I thought someone had spilled tea years ago. The stain was fresh. I touched it and it cooled my fingertip. The ink in the new name shivered once, as if the air had exhaled on it, and a silt of black flowed toward the edge where the stain had thinned. I tried to call Mr. Graff, the supervisor whose name now gleamed wet on the page dated tomorrow. The phone at his desk upstairs rang once and went to static. Static is a sound I thought I knew. This was wrong. It had texture in it, the thin scratch of pen on paper buried inside the hiss. I left the crypt for the corridor because I wanted to feel like a person again. The corridor smelled of floor wax and old flowers. A draft swelled from the chapel and brought back the odor of ink like a reminder I had not been dismissed. When I returned to the ledger, a second line had begun. The first character was my initial, not bold, not committed, a faint ghost stroke tracing E in search of courage. I put my palm on the paper without thinking, and when I lifted it, the water stain had taken the shape of my hand, as if the page had been drinking from my skin. I wiped my palm on my jeans and watched the stain retract, revering back into itself in slow motion. If you have ever seen water climb a wall against gravity, you know that is not a trick you forget. My job was to scan records, not solve them. The power in the crypt flickered and died for 2 seconds and came back wrong, dimmer, as if light could be shy. The computer screen went black and refused to apologize. The scanner stayed awake, its little green eye insisting it was ready to work if I would please pretend the rest of the world was not a problem. When the lights steadied, the quill had rolled closer to the ledger. The minute hand on the 3:33 clock had twitched half an inch, then changed its mind. I told myself the ledger was a prank with a delayed ink. I told myself it had been prepared by a bored intern with a sharp needle and a bottle of water. Anything you can name is easier to manage than something you cannot. I tried to tear the page. My fingers would not do it yet. My body decided before I did that if this was a curse, I would not be the one to spring it without cause. I did the small thing instead. I flipped back 10 pages to test the paper. In the gutter of every page, faint as veins, water stains spread in shapes that looked like paths. I held the ledger to the lamp, and the stains brightened, translucent and alive. Outside, unmarked graves spot the slope beyond the named rows. We joked at the grass there hums. The map on the page matched the slope like a glove. The stains traced the hollows where no headstones stand, and they were not old. They crawled forward as I watched, creeping toward a blank corner with the stubborn determination of mildew. That blank corner happened to be the lower right, where the new entry's death date would sit when the hand was finished writing it. At 2:44, the clock sighed without moving, and the radiator made a noise like a man clearing his throat. I went upstairs to find Graff, because some moments want a witness. His office chair sat alone under the window. A cup of coffee waited for a mouth that had not returned to it. The monitor glowed a spreadsheet that would never balance if he left it here to cool. I said his name, and sound from the cemetery answered. No voices, just the quiet you get when distance is listening too hard for itself. The security guard stool at the front door was empty. The lock had jammed without a key in it, the way old doors do when they want to be the only ones making choices. I tried it twice and felt the stubborn grain of the wooden cyst. The chapel was empty, candles out, pews smelling of lemon oil and dust. If the world had decided to hang itself on a hook for a minute, the hook was holding. I took the stairs down again because if I was going to be trapped, I preferred knowing what was doing the trapping. Back in the crypt, the ledger had opinions about my absence. My name had grown darker, by 2 letters. The ink looked wet, but did not smear when I tested it. The quill had turned so its jagged end faced me. The clock at 3:33 had gathered a soft fog inside its glass-like breath, although the glass was old and sealed. The sound of writing again threaded the room. Scratch and lift. Scratch and lift. The scratch matched the rhythm of my pulse until it felt less like hearing a noise and more like having one. I tried to stop it with common sense. People die every day. Ledger's record. The order makes comfort. What if this ledger felt the shape of death before the world did? That thought tried to be a red herring, a story that would let me wait out the night and come back tomorrow to tell someone whose job was paid better. The disproof was too tidy to ignore. I flipped to an entry from last month for a man who drowned in the quarry after choosing to step out on ice that could not hold him. The clock had stopped at 3:33 that day too. The notation was in Graff's hand. Next to it, a bloom of fingerprints and ink sat in a cluster. 5 ovals where no hands had touched the page. A pen does not write because it has to. It writes because someone leans on it. I looked at the cracked reed, felt stupid for wanting to speak to it, as if it were a dog, and spoke anyway. I asked what happens if a person changes their mind. The scratch paused for 1 heartbeat. The water stain at the corner peeled away from the page a fraction, like a blister. Then the quill pointed to a line 3 pages back where a woman's name had been begun and stopped. The rest of her page was clean. Her death had not come. She had not made the final decision that would have sealed it. My decision sat in front of me, shaped like paper. The line that had started my name held. The rest waited. If I pulled the page, maybe the book would be forced to pick another line. Maybe it would be nothing but bravado, and I would be a fool with a torn archive and a bad report. Choice pressure is dull until it counts down. The boiler clicked. The light dimmed again. In my pocket, my phone showed 4% and no bars. I tore the page. It did not rip like old paper. It tore with the sound of cloth, a slow, resistant sound that fought me and then caved all at once. The upper half came away in my hands. The lower half clung like skin when adhesive let go too late. Something cold licked my wrist. I looked down and saw ink seeping into the lines on my skin, finishing letters across the tender part where a watch tan had lived all last summer. The first 2 letters of my name laid themselves there as if the book had decided that if the page would not hold me, I would hold the page. I panicked. There is no pretty way to say it. I wiped my wrist with a towel until the fibers lifted and left a peeled rash. The ink did not leave. It did not even smudge. It pulsed instead, a throb that matched the clock that refused to move. The smell of wet ink deepened, a perfume too close to blood and rain. The quill rolled without being touched and fell to the floor, shaft first, with a little clap that should not have carried a sound large enough to echo. This is the part where the room shifts. The ledger flipped pages on its own. Not fast, not showy, a steady unscrolling like a priest in a hurry to reach a name. The ink from the torn page slid off the edge of the table and dripped to the floor, then split and ran into the cracks in the concrete like it had been waiting all night for gravity to remember it. The lines it drew were too clean. They flowed to the wall and up 6 inches before flattening, then wove back under the table legs and met in a shape that made my throat think of veins. The pages stopped on a spread of blanks. The top right corner was already dated with tomorrow's date. Under it, a series of dots where names begin, each dot spaced the way a roster tilts when someone has to read it aloud. One line was stranger than the rest. It had my birth date written neatly at the far left margin, as if someone had started my row long before my first day as a clerk. The rest of that line was empty. No dash, no end. No hand had dared write it yet. I understood the twist before I wanted to. The ledger was not a curse that kills at random. It recorded the moment a living person makes the choice that locks them on their path. Step on ice when you know it groans. Turn the car key after too many drinks. Walk back into a house that is burning because what matters is inside. Push a door that has been locked for a reason in a room where the air smells of ink. My line had a birth date and no death date because the choice was mine for now. The book did not offer a blank safety. It offered a bargain I did not say aloud. The empty line with my birth date waited for a second hand to complete it. The hand did not have to be mine. The ledger showed other rows where the end date had been written in 2 inks, as if one life had colored another. That is the part one I'm not proud of. For one breath, I looked at names and thought of lines I might prefer to finish instead of my own. I am telling you because pretending otherwise would be a second lie the book would not ignore. Graph, I thought. If the ledger had written him for tomorrow, and if his coffee was cooling in an empty room, then perhaps that line would be completed whether I asked for it or not. The thought does not flatter me. It is sick and human. I took the ledger and carried it upstairs. The scratch followed me the way a mosquito follows heat. In Graph's office, the clock on his wall worked fine. It said 4:21. The page in my hand said 3:33. My wrist remembered a letter wetting itself in a flesh and did not care to compare. I found his keys on the desk under a folder that said Vault Access. I took them without permission because permission seemed like a word from a different language. The elevator to the lower stacks stuttered on the way down, then opened its mouth as if to speak and decided not to. The hallway past the stacks bristled with file boxes and dust that moved without breeze. At the end, a door the color of dried ink stood, and the largest of Graph's keys fitted with a click that felt like a sentence. Inside, the temperature sank into my bones. Shelves of unclaimed effects lined the walls. Labeled packets from pockets, rings, watches, wallets that held photographs no one had stopped to collect. The ledger warmed in my arms, as if it preferred this room. The smell of old ink rose, and the scratch of the invisible pen returned, louder, as if happy to be home. I set the ledger on a workbench, and the lamp over it flared to life without a switch, then hummed the way machinery hums when it is about to remember its purpose. Pages uncurled like a throat clearing. Names arranged themselves column by column to show me a pattern. Every line where the death date had appeared early had a small inked thumbprint beside it. Not an archivist's joke, but a mark set down by a hand that was no longer warm. The fingerprints on the new page matched a set on a packet labeled Graph, Stephen P. Contents inventoried 5 years ago when his father was laid to rest. I saw the loop and felt my mouth go dry. The book did not pick people. People fed it by doing what they could not stop themselves from doing. I could have closed the ledger there and walked back upstairs to wait for the shift to end. The clock over the elevator said 4:39. Dawn makes the windows less sure of themselves just before 6. I carried the ledger toward the door, and the door refused me. The lock had reset with the key still in it. The handle turned halfway and jammed. The air grew damp, and sweat cold reached the inside of my elbows. The writing began again, not on the page, but on the floor where the ink had traveled into the cracks. It drew a line to my shoe and stopped at my toe like a dog that wants to be chosen. I tried to breathe slow, the old therapist trick from when money went bad and sleep worse. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. The ink line pulsed with my breath. When I hurried, it did. When I held, it waited. The clock in the vault was a small black cube with red numbers. 4:51. The 3:33 on the ledger's illustration clock face stayed still because it had learned to love the moment before the next thing starts. I set my name into the room the way you test an echo and felt the letter on my wrist give a lazy sting, a quiet threat, a promise. It occurs to me you might be wondering what the water stains did while all this spun. The stains on the open page crept into a shape of the ground seen from high. The unmarked patch behind row K bloomed like a bruise. I realized the stains were not maps I could interpret for anyone else. They were instructions for the ledger. The book was growing its own sense of place, rooting into the paper like ivy and reading the dirt above us for names it wanted to add. I thought of the red herring again. A predictive curse. A haunted planner that killed because it had ink to spare. That would be simpler. It was not true. The ledger recorded the sealing choice. It did not make it. If I filled a line that was not mine, I would be the hand that finished a sentence someone else had started. The bargain was uglier than any curse because it left me the one to blame. Sometimes horror is not a ghost in a hallway, but the design of a form you can choose to sign. What I did next is not absolution. I took Graph's file and put it beside the ledger. His father's print stared up, a blur of whorls that seemed to move if I squinted. On the ledger page with tomorrow's date, his name was wet as if the book kept it open to the air to finish curing. If I pressed my inked wrist to the margin beside his line, would the book allow 2 names to share the end? Would that buy me a blank? The thought came from a frightened place, not a cruel one. Fear is not innocent. It just talks softly. I set my wrist on the page. The ink on my skin warmed and bled, a bloom that did not drip so much as stretch to meet the paper. The most human heat I have felt in years ran up my arm and settled in my throat. The scratch returned, frantic now, the way a pen sounds when a child decides to draw a rain on a page that already had enough weather. The date in Graph's line darkened. The ink on my skin faded to gray. For a second, I believed I had traded places with a man who might already be on his way home. The vault door jerked. Someone had put a key into the other side. I yanked mine free and the lock turned. The door opened on an inch of cold air and a sound I could not mistake. The hiss of oxygen leaving a mask. The smell of hospital. Graf stood there. He looked like a man who had forgotten why he had come downstairs, then remembered, then wanted to forget again. Behind him, the hallway spread like a riverbed. He saw the ledger and the file in my wrist and understood the parts he needed to understand. He asked me what I had done. His voice sounded like a pencil grown tired. I told him the truth that would fit. The ledger writes when choices close. It is not here for us. We are here for it. He laughed without any smile and said the old caretaker used to keep a second book where he wrote the names of the ones who got away. He said there were not many pages in it. He stepped into the vault and reached for the ledger, and the ink on the floor laced around his shoe and tied a knot I could not see. At 5:12, the power flickered through the building and then steadied for good. Dawn commits late, and then all at once. The red numbers on the cube clicked over to 5:13. Graf took his foot back without knowing why, and the line on the floor followed him 2 inches and stopped. I closed the ledger because sometimes closing something is an apology. The scratch softened. The clock inside the book's illustration twitched a degree forward and then stopped at 3:33 again, as if I had not learned to love my own breath enough to ask it to keep moving. We left the vault without taking the ledger. The door locked itself behind us. That is not poetry. The key turned, and the handle settled the way a jaw sets before an argument. In the corridor, the morning smelled like damp wool and copier toner. The security guard snored in his stool like a man who had chosen not to hear the night. The front door opened for the first try. The sky outside had the color of a scab that healed clean. I breathed air that did not smell like ink and thanked the sunrise for doing the least it could. Graf made coffee strong enough to scald. He put the cup in my hand and stared at it like it was a model of life he could not rebuild. He did not ask me for the ledger because we both knew it would not be where we left it even if we went back. He told me my probation would not hold anything against me from the hours between 2 and 5. He did not tell me if his name still glistened in wet ink under tomorrow. We both had our own pages to attend to, and sometimes attention is the only payment a page wants. I wish I could tell you I never went back into that vault. I am not righteous enough to lie that big. Before noon, I checked the crypt for the ledger because part of me needed proof I had not conjured the thing. The shelf where it rested held a patch of dust with a blank rectangle in the middle, edges crisp as a fresh blade. The smell of ink had gone, as if someone had opened a window in a room without windows. The clock in the crypt still pretended to be stuck at 3:33, although we both knew time had passed. I went home at 10 after 6, late enough that the traffic had started to think about itself, but early enough that the world had not warmed. I took a shower and watched the ink on my wrist fade from black to gray to a shadow that could have been a bruise I had earned carrying boxes. I slept with the window open because air that does not smell like paper feels like a thing worth wasting. When I woke near noon to a knock, I wanted it to be a package or a neighbor asking for sugar. The envelope on my floor was thin and unsealed. Inside lay a single page, torn from a ledger that had not asked permission. The top left corner held my birth date. The line waited for a name. My name was half written, first letters ghosting forward as if the page needed to practice. In the margin, a set of fingerprints dried. Not mine, not Graf's. They belonged to someone who had already made their choice and wanted company. The clock printed in the page's corner had its hands at 3:33 and the glass fogged, as if someone had breathed on it while it hid in the envelope at my door. You were waiting for me to tell you what I did. I did not sign. I put the page in a drawer with the photographs that managed to live through the eviction, and I shut the drawer, so gently you might have thought it was sleeping. I sat down with my back against the bed and listened to a room that had only one scratch in it, and that scratch came from the street where a tree leaned too close to a gutter. I told myself the book cannot write what I will not give it, and I told myself the book already knew my handwriting. This is the part where you leave a comment or turn the lights up. If you ever smell wet ink where no one is writing, put your hands in your pockets and keep your choices small. If a clock stops at 3:33 and refuses to be ashamed of it, do not ask it for the time. If water stains draw a map on paper, be careful about walking where it points. Records are not always the past. Sometimes they're the shape of a future that wants your ink to look like consent. Now we move to the next story. If you made it this far, tap like so I know you're still with me. Shall we begin story 4? Story 4. The girl who visited her own headstone, rewritten. The night I saw myself kneeling at my own grave, the lantern flame bent like it was being breathed on from the wrong direction. It tried to crawl back into the wick and hide. I cupped my hand, struck another match, and told myself this was still about a dare, not a destiny. The light caught wet leaves and the shining edge of a name I knew too well, and the wind shifted just enough to carry the church bells from town. They didn't ring in any pattern I recognized. 1, then 3, then a pause that felt like a hell breath. If you have ever heard a bell forget its own math, you know how quickly bravado learns to be quiet. I wasn't supposed to be here alone. It was one of those stories you say out loud to kill, like naming a spider. Kids at school claimed a girl visited her own grave at St. Lucas, crying at it, touching the stone like a mirror. If you found her and didn't look away, you saw your own face. It's the kind of rumor that tries on fear like a dress in a mirror and hopes someone will say it looks good. I wore stubbornness like a jacket long before tonight. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm Hannah, the one who doesn't scare, which is just a polite way to say I'm very, very tired of backing down. The headstone was exactly where the story said it would be, in the narrow lane between the angel missing one hand and the maple that leans over the fence. The letters were deep. My full name, middle included. Birth date right down to the day. No death date. Only a clean dash with a little stone burr at the end like it had been sharpened for later. Below that, one unfinished line. She walked, and then nothing. The chisel had lifted, or the person carving had changed their mind. I told myself a joke about budget cuts, and felt my mouth pretend to believe it. She was already kneeling there, my coat, my braid, my red scarf trailing in the damp like spilled paint. She didn't flinch when I said my name. She didn't turn when the lantern hissed out as if pinched by 2 fingers. It took a second match, then a third, the flame coughing back and shivering, and when the light finally held, the girl, the other me, was gone. Only 2 dark knee shapes stained the leaves where she had pressed down. I touched them. The damp soaked my fingertips, not cold like rain, but warm the way ground gets after a body has been there a while. You can tell, even if you've never done the job. Your skin knows. I walked home with the lantern guttering and my head full of excuses. Wet air, stars aflame. Mirrors in the dark make tricks. And then I saw my knees in the hall light. Mud had dried there in matching ovals, grass seeds clawing into the fibers. I hadn't knelt. I hadn't. I changed in the bathroom with the fan on because it felt less like a confession if the noise covered it. In the mirror, for a second, my mouth kept moving after I stopped. No sound came out, just the shape of my name, and it wasn't mine anymore. My red scarf was missing. It should have been on the chair by the window. I keep it there so I don't forget it. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter, a shoelace someone else was tugging. I slept badly. The bells from town came in wrong again, spaced like someone counting on their fingers and skipping the same number every time. In the morning, I told no one. Nobody likes a brave girl who remembers how to ask for help. They like the performance better than the performer. At school, I cut down a hallway that smells like floor cleaner and lunch. In the big bathroom mirror, the one with the jag of silver missing on the corner, my scarf flashed red. I was bare-necked in the real world. In the glass, I had it on, looped soft like a hug. Behind my shoulder, second me stood just out of focus, pointing toward her throat, then pointing down like someone giving directions that don't translate. Her lips moved. I read them, and then hated myself for reading. Come back, before it counts. The lights flickered. The bell rang late. I turned, ready to catch her in the stall, ready to say my own name like an accusation. Only empty doors and the sound of a faucet that wouldn't stop. That night, I went again, because that's what the story wanted, and I'm not great at saying no to a story. The wind was wrong for smoke, but I smelled smoke anyway, a thin line of it sneaking sideways instead of up. The lantern's flame bowed and trembled, as though something was whispering close to it. The red scarf dangled from a thorn bush at the edge of the plot, snagged like it was hiding or like it had been posted as a flag. I took it back, angry at how relieved my fingers felt, and tied it tight. The bells from town rang out 1, then 2, then 4, and then the sound broke into a scrape that made me swallow hard. She rose from behind the stone, not climbing so much as rolling up, like a film played backward. Her eyes were mine and not. That's the only way I can say it without lying. She looked at the scarf. I looked at the scarf. It was on my throat. It was on hers. The lantern died. I could hear us breathing. One of us fogged the air. One of us didn't. I ran the first time I saw that. I'm not proud. My feet made decisions my brain signed later. At the gate, the latch wouldn't take my hand. It held shut like a mouth that didn't want to say no out loud. Behind me, the bells lost their temper and rang in a messy handful. 3, 3, 1, 3, 2. The flame clawed back to life when I shook the lantern. On the path home, I saw 2 sets of footprints in the mud. The second set matching the first so closely they might as well have been a shadow stepping on a shadow. I tried to step somewhere else. The ground offered me nowhere else. My parents asked nothing, and that felt worse. They were on their phones, nodding, laughing at something that didn't need me in the room to be funny. When I said hello, my mother's landed like a paper airplane that had lost its will to fly halfway across the living room. I stood in the doorway and waited for the world to remember my weight. It did, in that polite, late way it always does. I washed the mud off my knees. The third night, I went to the church instead of the cemetery, because adults keep keys and keys keep answers. The archives are in a room that smells like wet songbooks and pencil shavings. I flipped through the big ledgers because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. It was all births and deaths, and the little notes priests make when they remember to write feelings in margins. In one of the older books, a line ran down the page like a spine, and beside it a note in faded ink called a strip of the burial field the walker's lot. Every decade or so, a Hannah Lewis with my exact birth date had been penciled in neatly and then erased with irritation. Beside the erasures, a different hand had written, in smaller letters, "Do not chisel early. Let her walk." I shut the book because I didn't like what it made me think about choice. The bell struck 9 in the wrong rhythm. My phone screen dimmed and brightened like it was practicing blinking. I lifted it up to take a photo of the page and watched the image drain to gray. No words, no lines. The phone wasn't broken. It was embarrassed. I know what you're thinking, because I was thinking it too. Maybe the headstone was a mistake, a prank someone pulled on the town decades ago, and nobody fixed. Maybe the double was a rumor I helped by wanting it so hard. Red scarf, ghost girl, lonely teenager, add water. But she walked beside. I took the path up from the church straight to her, because anger is a kind of courage. The gate opened on the second try. I stepped past the angel with the missing hand and the maple with a long reach, and there we were. Me and the other me. We said our name at the same time, and the sound was ugly like 2 alarms competing. I grabbed the scarf at her throat and pulled. It came away in my hand. I felt the knot loosen against my skin, under my own ear, and the scarf I'd been sure I was wearing fell into my fingers even though I hadn't touched it. She smoothed her own scarf, identical now, and it lay there as if it had never left. Identity, it turns out, is a poor lock. "Pick," she mouthed. No sound. I heard it anyway. The bells fumbled to 4. The lantern flared and went meek. The earth in front of the stone had a shallow depression, the sort that happens when mourners stand in the same place too often. I stepped into it out of spite. The ground shaped to my feet with that warm, held tone dirt can have when it remembers someone's weight. The double didn't move yet. She was patient like water. The bells started counting in a panic, as if someone had wound them with the wrong key. 1, 3, 1, 2, 1. Someone once taught me that uneven bell sets used to sign warnings, that certain patterns meant weather or fire. This sounded like someone counting down with a list they didn't want to follow. The epitaph shifted in the corner of my vision, frost softening and then freezing harder. She walked beside, scratched itself into stone by the oldest hand in the world. I told her I wouldn't be replaced. She tilted her head like a person getting fitted for a hat. I said, "Go," and saw my mouth make the shape of the word and heard my voice not go anywhere. She touched the lantern's glass with 2 fingers, and the flame bowed toward her and then toward me, and then went still, like a jury deciding who gets the house. When she stepped forward, I stepped forward, the way you do in mirrors without meaning to. We were both in a little depression. There isn't room for 2 people in a space that expects one. The bells crashed into a tangle. The lantern didn't decide so much as admit a fact. It leaned to her, then snapped to me, as if a thought had been corrected. The twist is simple and cruel. The graveyard is a mirror that misplaces ownership. Whoever pushes becomes the one inside. Whoever hesitates becomes the one that walks away. That's the rule the walker's lot wrote in eraser marks and frost. I pushed. Of course I did. You would too if you'd spent your whole life being the version of yourself other people expect when they call you brave. My hands touched her shoulders and felt mine. The tilt at the left collarbone where a backpack strap digs. The small ache in the right wrist from falling off the porch railing last summer and insisting it wasn't a big deal. The scarf caught between us, and for a second felt like a third person choosing sides. The earth rolled. You don't expect soil to move like a body. It does when it knows how. Falling isn't mostly down. Falling is mostly toward. I went toward the stone, toward the dash, toward the place the chisel had saved for me. My ears filled with bells and my throat filled with the taste of iron from the lantern's smoke. I reached for the edge without believing the edge liked me. In the tilt, I saw her, me, standing above, scarf neat, eyes wide with that precise blend of pity and relief you reserve for a stranger on a bus whose stop you missed. She didn't smile. I did. That's how I know which of us was which at the last second. You want it to be one final decision. It isn't. It's a handful of tiny ones, all of which feel reversible until they aren't. I kept my hands open instead of making fists. I didn't scream. I let my weight be counted. The soil caught me with the care of an old mattress and steadied to a stop like a swing after a long arc. The bells managed a last 4 that fit together, and the epitaph finished with a scrape I felt in my teeth. She walked beside herself until she chose. Morning is rude. It puts clean light on things you were making into poetry 5 minutes ago. People saw a girl with a red scarf crossing the lane by the maple and waved. She didn't wave back. She kept walking with the careful stride of someone trying to step everywhere they're supposed to. Someone else, not many, but someone noticed the lantern sitting on the grass in front of my stone. When the wind lifted, the flame leaned by itself toward the name and then straightened as if embarrassed to have been caught moving. There are 2 lines at the bottom of the stone now. The first reads the sentence the frost chiseled. The second is the same sentence again, thin as a hair. One of them has been crossed. So faint you could argue the mark is a vein in the marble. It helps to argue. Arguments make the day softer. In the right light, you can see knee prints in the leaves, 2 sets, one on top of the other. If you go late, the bells keep doing their bad math. They aren't warning or celebration. There's something like a heartbeat for people who haven't decided which body they're renting tomorrow. The thorn bush still catches scarves. The lanterns people bring for decoration go out when no one's near them. You can call it wind. The red scarf looks different in photographs. It shows up either brighter than it should be, like someone added saturation, or darker, like a bruise. Sometimes it doesn't show up at all. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. That means you weren't. I don't know what to tell you about mirrors. They try to help. They fog for whoever needs anchoring. If you're lucky, that's you. If not, it's the other you, the one who knows the exact weight of the depression in the earth and how much room is in it. If you see yourself pointing at your own throat and then toward the headstone, go when you mean to. Decision is a kind of heat the world can measure. This isn't a cautionary tale in the shape of a moral. It's a weather report. There's a low pressure of choices over the walker's lot this week. Expect uneven ringing in the evening and ground that remembers. Wear something warm. Scarves keep your neck honest. If you hear someone say your name in your voice from the other side of glass, smile at her and see who smiles back. That's all you get. That, and a sentence the stone will finish when you're ready. Tonight, the flame in the lantern tilts by itself again. A small bow, a nod of attendance. It doesn't care which of us is which. It only cares that there are two, and one of them will walk away. If you're stubborn enough to come watch, don't bring a camera. It will lie to you. Bring your breath. You need to see whether it fogs. Bring a question you're brave enough to ask and brave enough to let answer you back. If the bells start counting, count with them. If they skip a number, that one was yours. Now we move on, or we don't. That's the truth the walker's lot keeps for us. If you stayed through this, tell me, would you have pushed or would you have waited for her to push first? Story 5. Footsteps inside the sealed mausoleum. The first time I heard the footsteps, the mausoleum had been sealed for 70 years. Not boarded, sealed. Mortar packed the door seam like scar tissue, and the padlock was a brown knot of rust that looked older than my father. Yet the sound inside was crisp as fresh boots on stone, a clean heel toe, turning tight circles under a roof that kept the rain out like a stubborn lid. If you have ever heard footsteps that belong to no one you can see, you know they carry a different weight, like a heartbeat that does not remember who owns it. I was a new groundskeeper. Part-time. Nights for a while until the budget settled. They told me to keep a log with timestamps and to walk the old Greaves row every hour because some kids had been tagging angels with spray paint. I needed the work. I had a reputation that could not afford more smudges and a wife who made the rent last month by counting out coins on a plate. I promised myself I would keep this job even if the rain soaked me through to the bones. It was raining now, not a storm, a steady fall like ticking made of water. Each drop hit the stones and rang a little and then slid away. The air smelled of iron and old leaves, and the lantern I carried threw a weak halo that made the mausoleum look like a giant had knelt and folded a stone rectangle over a secret. I checked the lock, I checked the seam, and then I started to write the time on the clipboard. The first footfall landed between the words, and the pen stopped because my hand did. I went around the crypt the way a doctor goes around a bed, half asking for permission and half pretending he has it. The sound inside tracked me. When I paused by the left wall, the steps paused too, waiting like a partner in a dance. When I walked, it walked. When I held my breath, the sound kept time with the rain until my chest hurt and I had to let the air back in. Then it matched me again, heel toe, careful and patient like a rehearsal I had not been told about. People think it is easy to be brave with stone. It is not. Stone has opinions, and none of them are yours. I crouched and ran my fingers along the seam to feel for gaps. The mortar was cold and rough. Candle wax had dripped in thin, hardened curtains down the seam. I did not like that at all. The flow lines ran toward the door from inside, pale and neat, like someone had pressed flame to the crack to see if light could get out. My lantern hissed when a drop of rain found the glass, and then steadied like it was listening too. I put my ear to the stone. The footsteps were not echoes of my breath. They carried grit inside them. Tiny friction that you hear only when a boot lifts and sets down on ground that remembers other nights. 3 slow steps. A pause. 3 slow steps. A turn that made a faint circle sound, as if a heel was carving a mark. Then stillness that was not silence at all, because the rain was still ticking and the blood behind my ear was still drumming, and something inside the mausoleum had learned to wait better than I could. I know what you're thinking. Animal, you say. Big raccoon. Stray dog. Kid sneaking in. I wanted that too. I went to the back wall, where the ground sloped down into a thicket, and looked for any hole or culvert that might give a body a path inside. The soil was heavy with rain and held itself like a plate. No digmarks, no disturbachis. The ivy on the back corner clung with a grip that had not been broken in years. I told myself it could still be a person who climbed in from above. The roof was a low pitch of slate, just high enough to laugh at ladders. No broken tiles, no ropes, no sign of a hand where should not be. I came down with mud on my knees, and the feeling the building had watched me decide the wrong thing. The footsteps started again, closer now, as if the stone between us had thinned to paper. I put my palm to the door. The wood was colder than the rain. The padlock sat in its hasp like a throat with a cough held behind the tongue. I called it in on the radio. Nothing answered, just a net of static that caught my voice and then let it drop. My phone had enough bars to tease me and not enough to give. Night shifts are like that for signals. They take their own messages and leave you talking to yourself with equipment for company. I wrote the time and a note on the log and told myself I would come back with tools before the hour turned, because men with tools feel like men who can make things stop. The second time I heard the footsteps, I had a crowbar in my hand and a flashlight stuck under my chin. The rain had thickened until the drops blurred together into sheets. Each sheet hit the mausoleum and drummed once and slid away. The rhythm found the footsteps, and they merged into one metronome. Heel toe went with drip drop until I could not tell which one began the other. I scratched the bar under the lock, testing a hasp. The sound inside went to a faster pace, like whoever had the boots wanted me to hurry. That is not how you make a man hurry. That is how you make him careful. I ran my light over every seam, looking for any place someone could have worked a thin blade to pry. Wax filled the cracks like it had been pressed from inside with a firm hand. Near the bottom, where time and water do the most work, I found only small mosses that gave up under my fingers as if too bored to hold on. The lock would not move. My mouth tasted like it does when you put a penny on your tongue to see if your teeth are lying. I listened again. The steps inside mirrored the rhythm when I shifted my weight. I took a half step back, and the sound inside took a half step forward toward the door. I moved to the left. It moved to the right. If I ran my knuckles along the wood, a finger's width lower, it answered with an echo just a hair higher, like when you play a game with a kid who wants to do what you do but beat you by an inch. Every time I moved, it made me feel like a teacher with a lesson I had not learned. I told myself pranksters. The old tunnels that used to run under the ridge for the water lines have myths attached to them. I pictured some teenager in a hoodie who had found a grate and a dare. The image helped for 20 seconds. The rain tapped out a 5 count. The footsteps let the 5 count run through them and then skipped one just as I was about to lift the crowbar to the frame. It was not mocking me. It was showing me it could count me. I tried the door once. Gentle first, then with my shoulder, because sometimes old wood remembers manners when you speak the language of posture. The mausoleum remembered nothing. The footsteps stopped long enough to make me believe in quiet. Then they started behind me. Not inside, behind. I turned so fast the flashlight jumped out of my chin and blew a ring of white along the wet grass. No one stood behind me, only the path and the graves and rain that had seen worse. The echo ran through my back and settled under my feet like I had just walked when I had not. That is a hard feeling to explain without sounding like a liar. You know how you sometimes hear your name in a crowd and turn and no one is looking? That moment of reflex lives in your bones. Tonight the reflex moved my boots without me. I looked down and saw small crescents of mud on the path where my heels had set, but I had not set them yet. The rain patted them until they smoothed into shapes that looked like they had been waiting for me. I could have left. I could have written a note, called it vandalism I could not stop, and gone to the truck to wait for dawn. I tried to do exactly that. The truck was a dark lump at the end of the lane with a streak of water on the windshield like a tongue. I turned the key and it coughed and then laid still, a polite corpse. The radio inside the cab lit, flashed, and went dim the way a firefly does when it wants to flirt with your patience. The road down to the main gate glittered like the skin of a fish, slick enough to tell me not to test it. Back at the mausoleum, the footsteps had returned to that slow, patient circle. I checked the time. My log said I needed to walk 3 more rows and then come back. If I left, I would still hear that rhythm all the way around, and it would find me at the top of every hour like a clock that did not need numbers. I decided to stay and finish the log here. If I had to write down what happened, I wanted to write it while it was still happening, not pretend the words would be cleaner in a dry office. I set the lantern in the puddle that had formed in the broken basin of the angel to the right. The flame reflected and made a ring that kept trying to close. I wrote. I listened. I waited for the kind of courage that feels like anger because ordinary courage had not shown up. The rain rhythm shifted without asking. It slowed to match the steps. Not my steps. The steps inside. Drip, pause, as if the sky had learned obedience from something with a better memory. You can mock me for what I did next. In the shed earlier that evening, I had found a skinny inspection mirror on a telescoping handle that we use for looking under mowers. I carry it because small tools make me feel like I have a plan. I extended it and slid the mirror into the seam at the bottom corner where the mortar had a thin chip. The angle was bad. For a breath, I saw only darkness and the silver freckles of dust. Then a slant of light from the lantern bounced off the glass, went under the door, and came back to my hand with a picture I did not want. The padlock lay on the mausoleum floor. New, shining, closed but not attached to anything. The hasp that had faced me on the outside was also inside, inverted like a mouth that had learned a new way to smile. Candle stubs sat in a row near the threshold, melted flat on the stone along the seam. Wax dripped outward in the direction my hand now held the mirror. Someone had pressed candles to the crack from within, and the wax had run outward as the flames touched air. I pulled the mirror back so fast I knocked it against the door and made the footsteps stop again. In the stop, I heard something I had not let myself hear before. Breathing, not mine. A steady, slow draw that sounded like a person sleeping upright. The kind of breath that comes when a chest has decided time does not need to mean what it always meant. The breath did not fog the crack. The night did not warm. The breath just sat between the footsteps and the rain as a thin valley of quiet where no human sound should be. I might have walked away then if the mirror had not shown me one more thing. At the top of the entry arch, inside where the stone curves and settles, mud had printed in shapes that belonged to boots. Not on the floor, on the ceiling. The pattern of tread was the kind you get from a cheap work boot bought at a store that promises quality more than it delivers. The size looked too much like mine for me to average it out to a stranger. The prints ran across the curve like someone had been walking the arch, which is what a person would do if gravity forgot a favor. You tell yourself all the wrong stories before you tell yourself the right one. Underground tunnels, kids with ropes, a caretaker who had a key he never logged, a family prank. Each idea bloomed and withered in a span shorter than a raindrop. The only story that stayed was one I did not want to say. The mausoleum was not a room where the dead rest. It was a room where the living are rehearsed. The rain kept time. The steps kept tempo. The breath was the count between. The door opened. I did not pry it. I did not push. The wood sighed and moved back against the jamb as if a polite hand inside had decided to welcome me. The smell that rolled out was not rot. It was the smell of wet candle wicks pinched between wet fingers. It was the smell of new iron and old stone. My lantern guttered and then fought itself back to a steady flame, as if that smell had made it remember something it wanted. I leveled the flashlight and saw a low chamber of stone boxes with brass nameplates, a floor dark as a mirror, and a line of wax that pointed to the center. Choice pressure is not a concept when you are inside it. It is a bare threshold and a thought that sounds like a voice you trust. My log needed a line that said I had checked inside in case of vandalism, and my job needed a man who would not lie on paper. I set the lantern outside the door in the wet, on the edge of the puddle, not as insurance, but as proof someone would see it if the door decided to close. I stepped in with one foot, then the other, and told myself I would touch nothing and leave a clean shape behind me. The door swung shut. Not a slam like anger, a firm closing like a signature. I held the flashlight up, and the beam cut the chamber into slices that did not want to be eaten. The footsteps started again. Not ahead, not behind, Around. A circle that stayed 1 arm's length away, just beyond where the light could reach. If I turned, the circle turned. If I stood still, the circle moved like a track with my own boots on it. Somewhere in that round, the breathing belonged to me, and I did not want it to. I called out. My voice made a sound that felt too small. It landed and crawled along the stone and came back without any names attached to it. The candle stubs nearest the door fluttered. No flame touched them. Their wicks were black and cold, but the stub itself flickered like a memory of heat. I took 2 steps left because there are moments when you test a room the way you test a fence. The footsteps took 2 steps right and counted the space I had left between us. The ceiling was higher than it looked from outside. The entry arch had tricked my eye. Inside, the room rose to a dome with a circle of stone at the top that had once been a skylight and was now a blind I filled with cement. Across the interior of that dome, where light could have run if it still had a path, a chain of muddy prints spelled the same pattern my boots carried. Each print was fresher than the last toward the door, as if something had been walking toward me upside down each time I came closer. I felt for the padlock on the floor with my toe and found it. New, smooth, cold. I slid it against the stone, and it chimed once, a high, thin ring that made the breath inside miss a beat. Names on the brass plates leaned out to meet my light. Greaves, Anson Greaves, Lillian Greaves. A row left blank, as if the order had stuttered. A single plate near the center that had been polished recently enough to show the line where a thumb sweeps when someone is thinking. I knew before I saw it. You always do. The center vault had no name when the record in the office was written years ago. Tonight it had one. The letters were shallow but clean. Daniel Morris. The dates were not dates. A birth year, a dash, then a blank. The blank held itself like someone about to speak. I stepped closer against what my knees wanted and traced the line with the light. The footsteps circled closer, but they did not cross into the space where my name lived. The circle tightened and became a track around the box, as if the room wanted me to see my own orbit. You will ask what the twist is. The boots that kept step with me were mine. My tread, my pace, my breath when I told myself to breathe slow, 6 out, 4 in like the therapist said. The room was practicing me. It did not need me to practice back. It had the rain for timing and the wax for marking and the lock for a trick. It had my footsteps from the ground outside, recorded in a way the stone could use to teach itself. The arch prints on the ceiling were not someone else's years old. They were the last rehearsal when I had lifted my foot without moving and the room had caught it and put it above me. I looked at the door. The seam was clean. Wax held its line without a drip. The lantern outside made a sweet oval of light that might have been a coin under glass. I thought of my wife and the plate of counted coins and the apology I would make if I broke a door I was told not to break. I thought of my job and the log and the way a foreman reads a report like he is looking for his own name by accident. I set the flashlight on the vault with my name because my hands wanted to be empty if the room wanted anything of me. What the room wanted was simple. It wanted me to keep walking until my steps became the only sound that mattered in here. It wanted the rain to follow me like a metronome. It wanted the candle stubs to dance without flame. It wanted to learn my rhythm so well that when I left, if I left, it could do it without me. I took 1 step and the circle shifted a hair closer. I took another and the breath inside doubled mine, and then we were in time like a cheap drum line in the back of a parade. I said the only prayer I remember. It is 4 words long and not even a prayer, not really. Let me out, please. The door sighed at my back as if it wished it could oblige. The lock chimed again under my toe. The arch prints above me faded as the ceiling drank them, and then new ones appeared 2 feet to the left, as if upside down me had decided to change lanes. I put my hand on the plate with my name and felt the faintest stirring from inside the vault. Not a knock, not a hello, just the kind of shift a person makes when turning to listen. In the half-dark, I tried to hear what that inside person wanted. I gave up quickly on the idea. It was a ghost with a story and a pocket watch. The inside person was only the room, wearing me like a coat. It was not personal. That made it worse. If it had said my name, I could have talked back. It did not say anything. It counted. It kept time and added one. I took my hand away because the skin on my palm had begun to sting where the new letters would go if I were the kind of man who belongs to stone. I walked the circle because I can be stubborn when the ground insists on it. The storm outside reached its tired middle, and the drops went slower and heavier. The rhythm inside went with them, and my breath did too. For a span that could have been 5 minutes or 50, the circle owned me. My steps placed themselves. My heels drew crescents on stone I did not see, and the dome above me learned their curve and mirrored it for the ceiling. When the circle stopped, I had stopped it, not by will, but by running out of the kind of energy that is made of fear. Something in the door relaxed. It was the same sound wood makes when a house decides summer is real and lets you open a window. The seam breathed. The lantern outside flared as if surprised to have more work, and then steadied again. I did not run. Running would have given the room one more measure of my stride. I walked to the door without looking back at my name and put my hand to the seam. The wood moved under my palm and opened a finger's width. The breath inside paused, a teacher waiting to see if I had learned enough. I took my hand away, and the seam closed the finger's width again like a mouth that remembered what smile costs. If I had forced it then, some part of me believes the lock would have fallen and the chain would have leapt and my boot prints would have stacked themselves in the doorway until the ceiling above them was a black ribbon. I did not force it. I spoke softly to the wood like it was an animal that had been taught one trick and was proud. I said I had work to finish. I meant the log. I might have meant more. The wood sighed once more and opened all the way. The rain outside sounded relieved to be itself again. I stepped across the threshold, and the circle of footsteps kept moving inside for one slow loop, as if the room wanted me to hear that it did not need me anymore. Then the sound thinned and went flat, and the breath inside let the last of a note escape, and then was quiet. The door closed behind me, polite as a handshake. The padlock on a hasp clicked itself shut and shone new in the rain like a gift no one ordered. At dawn, the crew found the mausoleum sealed. They found my lantern burned down to a thumb of wick in a puddle that had its own tide marks like a bathtub. They found my log with the times written to the minute until 4, and then written in trembling half minutes, because I had not wanted to be imprecise about anything that night. They told me the lock looked different. I told them the same. The foreman wrote a line in the site ledger in neat pencil. Grease Mausoleum. Do not enter. Daniel Morris logged. He did not look at me when he wrote my name, and I did not look at the way his pencil pressed harder at the end. I walked back alone at 9 when the rain had thinned to a whisper and the day had climbed into the trees. Mud circles ringed the mausoleum as if something had paced around it all night. The circles lay on top of each other, each one a little off from the last, like an imperfect machine trying to learn an exact curve. The pattern was not a human pattern. It was too patient. No sartens, no hesitations. Just an endless loop the way a horse wears a path when it has too much field and no fence to give it direction. I measured a print with my boot because sometimes a measurement gives you a reason to leave. The tread matched. The size matched. The little torn corner of my sole that catches in the kitchen mat matched. I stood in the ring and then stepped out because I did not like the way the ground under the loop felt slightly firmer than the ground outside it, as if the earth had been tamped by something marching in circles until the dirt remembered to hold its shape. I went home to a house that still needed money and a wife who waited with a look that tried to balance worry with "I told you so." I told her the rain had been bad and the radio worse, and that my boss thought the old lock had been replaced by teenagers trying to make us look foolish. I did not tell her that my name had been carved where a name should not be. I did not show her the white line on my palm where the stone had stung. Some truths need rooms that are smaller than kitchens and mornings. At night, now, I hear a rhythm in the gutters, even when the sky is clear. You can laugh, and I will not hold it against you. It is heel-toe, patient and sure, like a man who has a list and is checking it twice. Sometimes I dream of slate and a ceiling you could walk if the world agreed to tilt for you. I wake with mud on my heels I cannot account for, and a list in my head of things I have to do before the end of the week, because small deadlines keep you from hearing the big ones. If you take anything from this, take this. Do not teach a room your walk if you can help it. Do not set your breath to rain if the place you are in knows how to count. If you see candle wax in a seam where no hand should have reached, keep your hands warm in your pockets and go write a note in a log from somewhere dry. There are buildings that learn you faster than you can learn them, and some of them do not forget. Story 6. The gate that only opens outward. The cemetery gate had a habit that felt like a threat. At midnight, it locked itself with a metal groan that crawled into your teeth, and it only ever swung outward, as if the dead were customers who left one at a time. Yet someone was always found inside after sunrise, dazed or sleeping or pretending to have a story they could not finish. I know how that sounds. I also know the music iron makes when it decides, and the first night I took this job, the hinges sang my name like a warning I pretended not to hear. My name is Rosa. I was the new night guard, filling in after 2 men quit in the same week with excuses that sounded like lies and looked like fear. I needed the shift after my brother's accident made the rent feel taller than the month. The supervisor gave me a clipboard, a flashlight, and a rule that mattered more than the others. Document why the gate is always unlocked by morning. It is automatic, he said. It shuts at midnight. If it is open at dawn, something is wrong with the mechanism. He did not look me in the eyes when he said mechanism. I propped the gate with a wedge before midnight because testing a rule makes it easier to believe. The bars were cold and damp. Crows roost along the top rail in a row of hunched black commas, quiet as if punctuation could hold its breath. At 12 o'clock on the dot, the hinges flexed with that long metal groan, and the wedge hopped like it had been kicked from inside. The gate slammed, the padlock tongue shot through, and the crows did not move. On the inside of the bars, faint chalk tally marks caught my light. 5 short lines, then a slash, repeated. I counted to 30 before I made myself stop. Inside the guard desk drawer, I found a roll of bandages, a dead pen, and an old journal with a canvas cover swollen from damp. On the underside of the desk, taped where a nervous hand would tap, a brass key waited. The label was a strip of masking tape with 2 words in shaky block letters. Last resort. The journal cracked when I opened it. First page was a single line in blunt pencil. Never stepped through after midnight. The rest of the pages were times and notes and loops of the word out, written softer each time, as if the writer was trying to make the idea smaller. Unknown before danger, that is how it starts. The wind slid down the road and made the bars hum. From inside the ground, the hinge uttered a low groan, though nothing moved, like a throat cleared behind a door. I walked the path with my flashlight and found prints leading from the outside gravel to the inside grass. Fresh mud, crisp toe marks, no return prints. My first thought was vandals, but the stride was careful and heavy, more like someone walking in a hospital hallway at night. The crows stayed silent above me, heads tucked, eyes watching, and the quiet had the feel of a held breath. I tried the radio. Static nibbled my voice and spit it back chewed. The gate handle did not budge when I pulled. I shoved with my shoulder, and the hinges gave a low warning sound like a dog under a porch, nothing more. I turned my light on the bars and found new chalk cuts that had not been there when I counted. One more crude tally scratched under the last bundle, the powder fresh and clinging to the iron. I wiped it with my thumb out of reflex. The chalk smeared gray and left a taste of dust at the back of my throat I could not swallow away. You tell yourself the manageable story because it helps you breathe. I told myself teenagers had hopped the wall, so I checked the perimeter. The stone along the east side rises in 3 tiers, each topped with spears that mostly threaten raccoons. No scuffs, no torn cloth, no hair. The north fence sits over marsh ground that eats ladders. It was smooth as a nap. I stood at the corner and listened. Somewhere near the chapel, a hinge sighed again in even measures, like a metronome trying to teach a new song. The rhythm got into my steps, and then into my head until each footfall felt borrowed. I went back to the gate because that was my assignment. I wrapped my fingers around the cold bars and leaned my cheek to the iron like a child to a door. A shudder ran through the gate, subtle but mean. The crows snapped awake together, black heads lifting, eyes bright, but they stayed silent. I shifted my weight and tugged inward. The gate shuddered harder, just enough to pry a whisper from the hinges. The crows exploded into sound, a ripping, ragged chorus tore across the bars and up the road, a scream that belonged to air that had learned to hurt. I let go on instinct. The gate snapped outward on its hinges and bit my palm with the edge. Pain is a clean teacher. A slice opened across the meat of my hand, not deep but honest. I wrapped it with a bandage from the desk while the crows settled one by one and the iron groan faded back into its throat. My phone showed no service in a way that felt personal. I tried climbing to prove I could, but after the first run my boots slid. The bars sweated under my hands, slick with something that was not rain, and the higher I reached the more the iron grew wet, as if the metal itself did not want a body ascending where it could not escort it back. I dug in the journal because paper sometimes tells the truth when people will not. Halfway through I found a page where the pencil had bitten deep. The gate only opens outward, the writer had scrawled. That is not for spirits. It is for the living. A margin note added later in a thinner hand came with a small arrow pointing to a word I wanted to ignore. Trade. The chalk tallies count successful escorts, and if the night has taken in more than it lets out, the count holds. Never step through after midnight. The underline under never had gone through the page and scratched a ghost on the next sheet. Rain would have made everything easier to blame, but the night stayed dry and sharp. I checked the lock. I counted the tallies again. I repeated the instruction under my breath like it could make a barrier. Never step through after midnight. The wind brought the smell of hot metal. The scent hinges give off when friction warms them until the air knows sweat. I checked the key under the desk, cold and heavy in my palm. Last resort does not look like a choice until time climbs behind you. I told myself I would hold it and not use it, the way you hold a photo of a person you're angry at and pretend you do not look. The ticking element was the gate itself. Every few minutes the hinges gave a small groan and stopped, as if a hand pushed and a hand pushed back. The tallies did not move when I watched, but later, when I looked again, 2 new scratches had appeared. The marks were crude and uneven, like someone without knuckles did the writing. I should have waited. I did not. I slid the brass key into the lock. It fit with the terrible perfection of an answer you knew before you asked the question. I turned. The cylinder coughed. The bolt withdrew. The gate creaked and drifted outward a handspan and stopped like it had been told to hold. The key snapped when I tried to back it out. A bright, stupid sound in the quiet. Half the blade stayed in the lock, a tooth, a promise. The head of the key lay in my palm, warm now, engraved with a number that meant nothing to me. The crows lifted their heads again as one and went quiet in a way that was louder than any cough. The gate hung ajar like a mouth that had been told to say, ah. The air changed. Cold pushed in from a path. Not night cold, but the kind that rolls out of the storage freezer when someone opens the door too long. I heard footsteps on the path, slow and uneven, the way a person moves when they calculate pain. A shadow separated from a use and came into the edge of my light. It was my brother. Same jacket I bought him last summer. Same crooked way he carried his left shoulder now. Same face, pale with that focus he gets when he's trying to argue with hurt. He saw me and lifted a hand and said my name the way he did when he was 12 and lost me briefly in a store. I know what you're thinking. I thought it too. But listen to the part one almost missed. His shadow did not fall on the ground. It reached sideways. It clung to the gate bars like a set of dark fingers and spread across the iron in a shape that made my throat go dry. Every time he stepped, the shadow stretched and slid along the metal like oil across water. When he reached the opening, the shadow thickened on the gate, and the hinges gave a low rasp that made the crows shuffle on their rail. I took one step back, then forward again, because seeing a loved one in pain turns your body into a lever before your mind agrees. He asked to be let out, not with words that made sense for our lives, but with a tone I knew. Please, Rosa, please. The gate wanted to open. I could feel in the hinge. It could only swing outward, and now it had a reason. The journal line sat in my head like a stone I did not want to carry. Never stepped through after midnight. The key was broken. The opening was an invitation and a threat. If he was my brother, it was simple. If he was not, it was simple in a meaner way. The chalk tallies flickered in my light like small white teeth, counting without mercy. Choice pressure is mean because it makes time thin. I thought of my brother in his dark room with a fan that always rattles and the careful way he has to sit to put on his shoes now. I thought of the month that had outpaced my pay. I thought of the fact that I had always been the one who put her shoulder to the door when a door would not cooperate. I did what I'm built to do. I put my hands on his shoulders and pushed him through the gap toward the road. He moved too easily. The shadow clutched the gate and then tore like wet cloth. The gate slammed. Iron shouted down the lane, a long metal cry that emptied my lungs by example. I stumbled forward and caught myself on the gravel outside. My knees hit hard. I looked up to see him on the road with his hands to his face, breathing like air hurt him. The crows went silent again, a silence that rang in my ears. I turned, ready to finish the apology that had formed while I pushed. On the inside of the bars, a woman pounded her palms against the metal and mouthed my name without sound. Her jacket was mine. Her cut hand was mine. Her eyes were mine, and wider than mine had any right to be. I froze because my body understood that I was not the only me anymore. The inside Rosa pounded until the bars shivered. Her mouth formed a word that looked like wait, then a word that looked like wrong. The chalk tallies at her shoulder were different. They counted one higher than the marks I had seen minutes before. The gate would not move when I tried it. The broken key head sat like a tooth on the ground, and the crows lined their black bodies into a scolding row that made my skin try to jump off my bones. I called to the woman inside the bars, which is to say, I called to myself. My voice did the way a voice does on a bad phone line. It went out and did not come back. The other me pressed her palm to the iron, and I pressed mine to the same spot. Cold but hard. I felt nothing but metal. No skin, no wolves. She said another word that looked like journal. I ran to the desk and flipped pages with hands that were less steady than I liked. The last entry had not been there before. Gate opened outward at 2:47, escort present. The handwriting was mine, but I had not written it. The next line had 3 words. Trade recorded, waiting. I did not sleep through the rest of the night. I did not sit. I stood in the road where the gravel makes your ankles argue and watched the bars. Sometimes the inside me walked away from the gate into the dark like a person testing a room, then came back and tried the lock again, then pressed her head to the cold and stood that way too long. The crows stared until their eyes looked like brads hammered into the night. At the east rim, the sky went from black to iron to a color like a bruise that will not decide if it wants to heal. At first light, the gate gave a small testing shiver, as if waking from a nap. The hinges breathed. The locked tongue slid in, then out, then in, as if unsure of its manners. The inside me had stopped pounding and stood with her hands at her sides, looking up at the crows the way you look at a choir to see if the next line will be kind. The padlock clacked, once almost polite. The gate did not open. The chalk tallies on the inside bars had one more slash. If you have ever watched a number become a different number in real time, you know how your stomach makes a small fall with no ground in sight. People came with morning. The supervisor with his starchy mouth, 2 groundsmen with coffee and jokes they did not use, a woman from the office with the look of someone already late. They found me outside the gate with a broken key head in my fist like a talisman that had forgotten its job. I told them the lock had jammed, which was not a lie in a small, pitiful way. They opened the padlock with a manager's key I had not known existed. The gate swung outward without complaint. Inside there was no one. The path held prints that matched mine, heel to toe, circling the lane as if someone had rehearsed a route until the ground agreed to remember. They wrote a line in the sight ledger while my hand bled through the bandage, and I stared at the bars like they owed me a question. Greaves Gate. Automatic. Investigate. The supervisor did not ask about the chalk marks. He scraped them with his thumbnail and walked away as if white dust meant nothing. The crows had migrated to a tree and watched us with the calm of creatures who see only patterns. When the crew scattered, I went inside and counted. The tallies added to a number I would rather not list aloud. They had gained 1. The slash looked newer, wetter somehow, like chalk that remembered fingers. I went home after that shift with the kind of tired that feels like a bell still ringing. My brother texted me a thank you for the jacket I had left on his chair the day before. He asked if I could help him get to a doctor next week. He sent a photo of the first solid meal he had kept down since the accident. His shadow and the picture fell on the kitchen floor like a normal shadow should. I stared at the image for 5 minutes and told myself the truth I could hold without dropping. If there was a trade, if something had to be left to open the gate, then the gate had been paid. For now, some nights since I've stood on the road and listened to hinges breathe like lungs learning a new exercise. The crows come and go, and when the bars try to flex inward, they scream from their perches until the metal remembers its job and pushes the other way. The chalk marks change if you look too long. The brass key under the desk is gone. The journal sits where I left it, heavier now, the spine reluctant. The first page still whispering never in a pencil scratch that repeats in my head every time I see midnight think about itself. If you ever find a gate that only opens outward, understand what that means. It is not a kindness. It is a contract. Do not step through after midnight, because your feet will not know which side of the bars they belong to when the hinges decide. If you see new tallies on the inside, ask yourself who left and who stayed, and why the crows know when to be silent and when to scream. And if a loved one waits at the gap begging, look at the shadow, not the face. The iron knows the truth before you do. Story 7. Lanterns among the unmarked. The first time I saw the lanterns, they were already moving. Dozens of small lights hovered knee-high across the field that the town insists is only scrub and rain sink. They bobbed as if held by hands too tired to lift them higher, and the air smelled faintly of kerosene, though I carried no lamp. I am Jonah, the local nuisance with a notebook. If you have ever wanted a place to confess a bad obsession, a cemetery field after midnight will listen. The glows slid over the ground like fireflies that had learned to wait, and I told myself, finally, proof. I came for proof because I was out of time. The council meets at 9, and my grant dies if I cannot show them what is buried where no one wrote a name. They call it the meadow behind the ridge. The oldest map calls it borrowed ground in a hand that looks ashamed. I brought a camera, tripod, GPS, and a surveyor's compass rescued from a junk shop. The compass spun like a patient with a fever even before the first light showed. It pointed at my shoes, then at the field, then at nothing, and the needle trembled like a lie. I walked in slow because soggy earth will take your ankle if you let pride choose the pace. Under my boots the soil dipped in ribs, not random, not natural. Curves of soft hollows ran in lines the way a body settles over time. I marked a grid with string and stakes and told the night that the first row would be my start. The camera clicked into place with the comfort of a tool that wants to help. When the first lantern drifted closer, I photographed it the way a person photographs a meteor, quick and reverent, as if the light could flee. The photograph came back blank. Not black, blank. The field showed in gray. My shoes appeared. The long shadow of the tripod cut a dark triangle across the grass. No light hovered in the frame, but a thin shape stood where the glow had been. A figure printed in the grain, like a smudge left by a thumb. I blinked and looked up, and the lantern bobbed in the air, without caring that my machine had declared it not present. If you have ever felt a room breathe and then refused to show on video, you know that stubbornness lives in the throat. I tried another shot from a different angle. Blank again, and the smudge in the frame looked like the shadow of someone standing where I would stand if I wanted to watch myself work. I glanced behind me because that is habit. No one waited. The trees at the edge kept their dark shapes like good furniture. The wind moved through the grass and made the ground sound like a sleeping person. I tied the string tighter because it felt good to fix any line at all. The compass needle swung until it pointed into the field, and I told myself, chase one. I followed a single lantern as it drifted away from the others, slow and indifferent. It slid between two low depressions and wavered over a third that was wider, like a chest drawn shallow. The needle on the compass tried to match it. It spun and then settled toward the light, then whipped behind me without warning and stayed there, stubborn as a dog. I turned and found nothing. When I faced the light again, it had moved closer to the trees and shivered as if talking itself down from a choice. My breath made fog that the glow did not care to borrow. seeds like to plant themselves. Early in the night, I had found a child's shoe half buried in moss, the small kind with scalloped edges and a button gone missing. I wedged it on a stump so I would remember to return it to the office in case someone missed a piece of their history. When I turned now, the shoe sat beside my bag with my notebooks, patient and present. I had not moved it. Things move when the field wants a new map, and you're not the cartographer you think you are. The lanterns began to gather. First a handful, then a circle you could stand inside if you wanted to feel what a wall feels like when it decides to stop pretending. They lowered while they moved, not much, only an inch or two, but enough that my heart found a new pace. The camera whirred and refused to show them. The GPS drew a line of zeros like a heartbeat gone flat. The compass needle spun until it pointed straight down. I knew the sound of a rehearsal by then. The field was practicing for a shape it meant to wear. I checked the time by the moon because the phone died at exactly 1. You learn to guess an hour by how much shame you feel about staying. The lanterns bobbed closer, and every place where a glow hovered, the soil offered a soft dip like a breath held too long. When my string grid crossed a light, the line sagged as if heated for below. I said the names of tools out loud to make the night less busy. Tripod, compass, map. The words came back like stones dropped into a river, quick, small, swallowed. I tried speaking to the lights. That sentence sounds foolish written here, but it felt like a thing worth trying. I asked what they wanted. The nearest lantern wavered toward my face and stopped short, close enough to tint the corner of my vision. The light had no flame inside, no wick, no smoke. It was a roundness that behaved like fire without any heat. The air around it smelled faintly of kerosene anyway, the way a jacket smells for a minute after it walks through a room with a lamp. When I moved my hand, the glow followed, curious as a moth that has learned patience. If you have ever convinced yourself you are being guided, you know how quickly gratitude looks like trust. The ring opened and a path of lights threaded between depressions. The compass shook and then settled in their direction like a pointer hound that finally sniffed a clear line. I stepped into the path because my feet decided an answer before my head did. Every few strides, a lantern lifted a little and then sank again, almost like a nod. I told myself that the field had decided to help the historian for once, and the thought sat sweet on my tongue. Then the compass needle jerked. It left the path and pointed past my shoulder and held hard. The nearest lantern dimmed like a breath that has run out. It winked out with no smoke, like a memory snuffed with a pinch. The air shivered where it had been. My camera shutter tripped on its own and showed me, when I looked down, a photograph of me standing in a ring of shadows that had not been there. The smudged shapes hung at ankle height in the image, vague and headless, like a gathering trying to decide if you're entertainment or food. I told myself red herrings save amateurs from stupid stories. Ghost guides make good bedtime talk. Real work means data and coordinates and lousy posture. I tried to step off the path. The lights shifted to block me, a soft corralling without any touch. The soil gave at my heel for the first time all night. Not sinkhole soft, not quicksand, only a gentle surrender as if ground had decided to permit me. That is the moment when fear learns the map in your mouth. The word later tasted like mud. I turned back toward my string grid to reset my courage. The grid was gone. Stakes stood where I had placed them, but the lines now ran in a figure I had not tied. The shape described a spiral that had not existed when I started. At the center of that spiral, a lantern hovered at knee level, brighter than the rest, its glow as steady as a traffic light. The child's shoe sat under it, neat and pointed as if waiting for a foot. The compass needle swung, spun, and then faced that center and quivered with a tiny, eager panic. The smell of kerosene grew stronger. I checked my bag for a leak, even though I knew I had brought no fuel. The flap lay open, my name scrawled across a folder peeking out. The heel of my palm left a damp print on the paper when I shoved it closed, and I wiped my hand on my jeans because the damp felt wrong, cleaner than dew, like a liquid someone intended. The whisper in the grass rose and fell, and tucked inside the sound, if you let your ear dig a little, you could hear a breath that did not need a chest. I knelt beside one of the smaller depressions and pressed my fingers into the soil. The ground was cool and refused me at the first knuckle. The shape under the surface felt like ribs. I know how that sounds, but if you have ever pressed your hand to a chest in a hospital and felt the lift shallow beneath skin, you know that particular give. The lantern above that dip lowered a fraction and brightened to please me. I pulled my hand away and saw a faint print where my palm had warmed the earth. The print held when the breeze should have erased it. I took a photograph of my handprint because sometimes you record the thing you hate so you can argue with it later. The camera saved a gray rectangle. The print did not show. In the upper left corner, faint as a film defect, the shape of a face blurred into grain and left nothing when you leaned in. The lantern above the dip drifted sideways while I looked like someone rolling onto their shoulder. Every glow near me eased an inch lower, and the ring drew in until my breath became careful without my agreeing to it. Isolation comes quietly here. My phone blinked out at 1 and never mourned itself. The path to the road darkened into connivance. My string had been rewritten. The lights had become the only illumination in the field, and the dark beyond them looked thicker than dark has any right to look. I tried to find the chapel's roofline as a fixed point and spotted only a darker shape against the sky that could have been anything generous or unkind. I told myself that sometimes the only way out is through, and the words tasted like a choice asking to be fed. The old record in the archive calls this section borrowed ground. The note below, it says that winter burials during the fever year were laid without names when names could not be found. I had read that note like a thief reads an invitation. Tonight, it became a translation. Borrowed means take now and pay later. Borrowed means the ground returns what is owed when it can. The lanterns were not guiding me to safety. They were calling in accounts, and the compass was honest enough to rat them out by pointing at whoever would be added to the list next. The shoe beside my bag had been small the first time I found it. Now it looked wider, stretched in the toe, as if someone had forced a bigger foot into it. The leather was damp and smelled faintly of iron under the kerosene, like a puddle near a rail line. The glow above the spiral's center hovered directly over a depression that was no longer oval. It looked like a person had just climbed out and left a hint of their weight behind. Heat rose from it. That was not heat, only the idea of warmth that the mind reads as memory because it needs to. The point of no return always wears a face so ordinary you want to laugh. Mine looked like a kneel and a gesture with a tape measure and a muttered note blown off the page by my own breath. I moved toward the center of the spiral because the grant required proof, and the book that holds my life wants a paragraph with numbers. The lantern above that bigger depression brightened in a way that felt grateful. I set the tape across the dip and watched it sink a fraction at the 2-foot mark, a little bow like a spine finding comfort. When the ring finally rushed me, it did not feel like an attack. The lanterns sank all at once, no sound, only a sudden intimacy with the ground, and for an instant I saw shapes beneath each glow. Not bodies, not faces, hollows that had learned a human braveness. The light was not flame at all. It was the memory of light, held in the sockets of something that remembered looking up. The eye remembers how to want, even when the rest of the person is given back. The field had borrowed want and was practicing it in front of me until the night forgave it. I ran. My head decided later. My legs threw me past the ring, over my own rewritten string, and toward the darker shape that I had guessed might be the chapel. I glanced back because a person always does. The nearest lantern followed, not fast, only steady, a neighbor who has decided to walk you home while you think about whether you should ask them in. The compass needle spun and found north and threw it away and pointed straight to the child's shoe in my bag. The shoe sat with my string tied neatly through its lace hole like a note on a gift, and the end of the line looped around my ankle in a figure I did not tie. I stumbled and went down, not hard, but with enough dignity lost to make my face warm. The loop around my ankle lay there like a gentle hand. The lantern above the central depression tilted as if pleased, and the soil eased in a way that looked indecent. I sliced the string with my pocket knife and scrambled back, and the cut line slid into the dark and vanished as if sinking through a gap. If you have ever felt your own name align with a blank space on a form, you know that click. It sounds like a drawer closing in a room behind you. The shoe lifted. No hand held it. The glow beneath it rose to meet the soul as it climbed, and the old leather turned in the air with the care of a person fitting a memory to a story. It settled beside my boots and tipped in a question. The lantern above my tape measure flared. I pictured the council chamber, plastic pitchers of water, heavy agendas, my grant proposal with its polite desperation. I balanced that against the field asking to use my pattern for a while. I will not flatter myself here. I was tempted because vanity makes odd partners with fear. It is not a hero move to lay your hand on a thing that wants you. It is only a choice that refuses to be walked back. I reached into the center depression and pressed my palm to the soft soil because I wanted one number to bring to the table in the morning. The lantern above me sank until it brushed my wrist with light. The 70-year-old air in the hollow accepted my hand like a guest and held it. The field listened to my pulse and copied it. The lights around me brightened on that rhythm and kept it, ready to perform when I left. After that, the photographs did not matter. I took one, and the frame showed the moon, and a smear, and all the proof a council will not accept. The GPS scrolled zeros that looked like a row of open mouths. The compass needle stopped and stayed on the center dip where I had pressed my hand. Every lantern above a depression deepened to touch, like a person leaning in to hear one more secret before the room lights come up. The smell of kerosene faded. The air tasted like pennies for a second, then like clean water, then like nothing at all. The night endured itself. That is how it felt. A long patience, a long practice, and a rehearsed series of small extinguishings. One by one, the lights winked out with no smoke and no apology. Each time a glow vanished, the compass needle tipped in that direction, then turned back to center. I did not sleep. I paced and counted my steps and forced them not to match the drops gathered under the grass that formed on my boots. The child's shoe returned to the stump where I had found it, without walking, and waited for me to pretend I had put it there myself. At the edge of the field, the first gray of dawn showed the texture of the grass, 1,000 pale threads needing light. The lanterns dwindled to the last dot above the depression I had measured. It pulsed twice, gentle and formal, and went out like a candle pinched between careful fingers. The hollows looked like ordinary hollows again. The compass laid its needle flat and relaxed. Birds began the uneasy morning conversation that sounds like a room learning how to be a room after someone leaves. I gathered my gear with the clumsy speed of a man who wants distance. The bag felt heavier than it should. My camera case was lighter. When I checked, the camera had gone. The strap lay where it had been. The case was empty as a pocket turned out. I told myself theft, though no thief leaves your maps and takes your eyes. The folder with my grant proposal had one extra sheet that addressed itself without a stamp. Borrowed ground, typed at the top with my name pinned underneath like a tag on a toe in a story you do not read to children. They found my bab by the trail at 8, a pair of hikers who wake up earlier than Shame does. The ranger called me at 8:15 to ask if I had lost something important. I told him yes, because I wanted to hear a human voice say any word with a consonant. At 9, I stood before the council and said what I could say. The field is not empty. The field holds what the maps ignore. The field returned some of what it took and asked a smaller piece from the living to keep its balance. The room nodded the way rooms nod when they do not want to be haunted. When I went back that evening to collect the rest of the string, a new depression lay near the center, small and neat, like a leftover thought after a long conversation. A faint glow smoldered inside it. Not a lamp, not a phone screen, something else that remembered how. I stood there in the version of quiet that follows after a truth decides to live in your ears. The compass needle stayed still, then quivered and pointed once at the glow and then at my chest, polite and accurate. If you ever chase lights across a field where nobody admits bones were put, do not chase alone. Do not trust photographs. Trust the way the soil lowers where nothing should, and the way a compass will rat out a lie by trembling. If a child's shoe follows you, put it somewhere ordinary and walk away. If a glow settles over a shape that is your size and calls that kindness, ask what kindness is worth. Borrowed means the world is keeping a ledger even when you do not. It is better to offer something you can afford to lose. I sleep less now. When I do, I dream about a room where lights hover at the level of knees while people speak in the old voices that you cannot teach. I wake with soil prints across my palm that look like lines from a tape measure, and I wash them off, and they return faint as a blush. The council renewed my grant for another 3 months because the words borrowed ground on official letterhead look like caution and not like superstition. I will map what I can map. I will not press my hand inside any hollow again. And if you go to that field at night, and the air smells faintly of fuel that no one carries, keep your own breath quiet and your steps strange. The ground loves a pattern it can practice. Do not give it yours. If the lanterns open a path and you feel grateful, remember that gratitude is a kind of yes. Walk backward with your eyes on the dark. The lights cannot show on a camera because they do not belong to your hour. They belong to a hunger that learned manners. Story 8. The choir beneath St. Elmo Cemetery, I will tell you the truth the way it arrived. At first it was not a voice. It was a thrum in the floor of the chapel, a low pulse that made the candles lean as if a quiet breath were rising from beneath the limestone. I thought the boiler had coughed. Then the wick of the altar candle wept a bee that climbed instead of fell, and the wax bulged upward like a bubble. If you have ever seen heat come from places it should not, you know how quickly prayer becomes listening. They sent me to St. Elmo as a test or a kindness, depending on who told the story. The chapel door hung tired, and the pews remembered more funerals than weddings. I am Father Miguel, new to a parish the map forgot, and I wanted to believe the sound was pipes or cars on the ridge road. But the hymn began where no pipe belongs, deep in the stone, and it knew a tune that had never touched a hymnal. It came up through the soles of my shoes like a memory. On the second night, I was foolish enough to explain it to myself. Wine through vents makes vowels. Gravel in the walls makes consonants. If you stack the noise just right, a human mind will call it a choir because a choir comforts. The register sat on my desk, an old book with vellum that curled at the corners. Names have been scratched out in more than one hand. Each strikeout left a shadow of letters, as if the erased did not want to fully depart. I traced the indentations and told myself nothing about them mattered yet. I lit 4 candles and waited for midnight. When the clock in the sacristy sighed to 12, the floor stirred. Candle wax climbed on all 4 wicks in little white domes. The baptismal font by the door, cracked and dry since the last leak, gathered water at its bottom as if the stone had learned to sweat. I touched the rim and found a cold that did not belong to air. The first verse rose then, low and slow, not Latin, not anything I could name, but close enough to a psalm to trick the ear into thinking it had heard it before. Unknown before danger is how these things arrive. A single voice hummed the bottom note, then another found a third, then a braid of tones braided me where I stood. The soil under the chapel floor trembled in time, not enough to rattle, only enough to make the candle flames twitch like nerves. I opened the register because there is a comfort to paper when the ground becomes water. The pages fell to a section where 5 names had been scraped, then inked again, then scraped again. The scrape marks made a rhythm thick with impatience. I walked to the cellar because listening is a kind of descent, and I wanted stone between me and whatever tuned the earth. The stairwell down smelled like coins and damp books. Dust shuffled along the steps when I moved, not because I kicked it, but because the hymn shook it loose. At the bottom, a wall of bricks had been laid over passage. The mortar bulged in sweat beads, wet and new. I set my palm to it, and heat breathed through the clay like a sleeping thing. The verse rose a half step and slipped my name in between 2 notes as if it had learned me yesterday. I went back up slowly because haste is a poor companion to fear. In the nave, the candles had grown skirts that fattened outward from the base, as if they had been lit from below. The font refilled while I watched, a clear inch growing without drip. I dipped 2 fingers and found the water colder than cold. My phone found no signal and then died in a way that felt chosen. The bell rope hung from the loft, and when I pulled, It slid through my hands soundless, as if the metal above had swallowed its tongue. I told myself it was a purgatorial song. I am a priest, and I am allowed to hope for purgatory. I knelt and prayed the prayers for the unblessed, the ones whose graves lack a cross. The floor trembled to the rhythm of my words, and the choir caught my cadence and tucked it in its pocket. The second verse did not ask to be released. It asked to be joined. The offer braided my name through its vowels again, and in the faint vowel of Miguel, I heard the sigh of a vowel from the register where my name had been penciled once as a visitor and then erased harder than necessary. I opened the register and flipped backward. Near the year of the fever that swept the town, I found a page where names had been copied, then overwritten with notes, then struck. In the margin, someone had written a line twice, buried outside the blessing, because the blessing came late. The ink had bled a little there. The bled letters matched the length of the notes I heard when the choir held its breath. A letter is only a shape for a sound, and even a sound will remember where it was meant to rest. I tempted silence with a flashlight and went back down. The wall over the stair now bled water from its seams. It did not run downward. It beaded and crept upward across the faces of the bricks, a creeping like capillaries when you press a fingernail. The heat under my palm had become a steady warmth. Not dangerous, not kind, simply insistent. The hymn took on the tone of a question and waited. I played a practical man then. I tapped the bricks with a chisel. The sound came back softer than stone, like a cavity practicing its echo. I did not own a sledge, so I argued with the edge of the chisel and the heel of my hand. A single brick shifted. Damp sucked at it from behind. When I pried it free, a mouth of dark opened the size of prayer book. Air breathed through gently, not musty, not grave, but cool in a way the throat likes. The hymn filled the hole as if the darkness had always been a speaker. I raised my light and saw a stairway turning left, then left again, built out of the same limestone as the chapel. The stair had been bricked after, and not tenderly. I returned to the nave because a priest who plays minor deserves a witness, even if it is a page. The register lay open to a place I had not marked. A pencil with a chewed end had rolled to the gutter. A faint line had been traced where my name should be in the current year. Not ink, a light scoring, like someone started a letter and changed their mind. The choir thickened its texture and let a higher voice join in, a woman perhaps, or something trying to sound like one. And inside the long tone, I heard a syllable that matched the shape of my own voice when I greet a child. The doors of the chapel closed without a slam. They found their frames and settled. I tried the latch and it pretended to be stuck, then leaned harder into the pretense and became truly stuck. The bell rope fell from aloft and kissed the floor. I pulled once and felt weight, but the clapper did not speak. Bells in old places sometimes learn to say no. My phone lit to a white screen, then sighed to black, then refused to pretend it was ever a phone at all. If you have ever been allowed to be alone by a place that wants you, you know the quality of that permission. Faith is a posture in a room. I set a chair in the aisle and sat with the register in my lap and the hymn in my bones. I read names with crosses beside them. I read names that had been crossed out. The sung syllables did not match the Latin, and yet they matched the length of those struck names, long for some, short for others, held for 5 counts where someone had taken 5 days to die, held for 3 where someone had drowned fast in a winter ditch. The choir moved with those measures like a hand over braille, finding texture. I argued my theology with the floor, and the floor did not argue back. I said the dead have their liturgy, and we have ours. The hymn became the cadence of my morning prayer for a week I had not yet lived. It fed me my own tone and waited to see if I would answer. When I stayed quiet, the volume rose a hair until the plaster powdered from the ceiling seam and made a little white snow on the pew backs. The font brimmed, then settled. The candle wax swelled until it looked like a skirt around a dancer, tall and improbable. This is where a story usually gives you a ghost. I will give you something less polite. The truth is not beneath the chapel. It is inside the cemetery itself, and the chapel only listens harder than the rest. When the choir rose into a loud passage, the graves outside sang along with it. not with voices, but with pressure. The soil thumped in my chest like the first note of drum. Every headstone leaned a degree toward the nave and then leaned back as if nodding. The hymn wrote itself not in the air, but in the bones of the ground, and our voices are bones that learn to vibrate. The easy answer was purgatory. I wanted to love that answer. But the lyrics are not pleas. They're invitations that curl like fingers. Come, sing this with us. Come hold this note we cannot finish. Come and breathe where breath is thin. I whispered a verse from a funeral rite to test the air, and the choir grabbed my cadence and matched its length, then bent it upward into a melody that was not mine. When I stopped, they held the last vowel of my line as if it were their own word. I confess a smaller thing. I walked between the pews and placed my ear to the floorboards like a child eavesdropping on a party below. The voices pressed my eardrum with soft insistence. They did not come from a single place. They came from 100 places, each a little to the left of a grave, each a little to the right of a name in the register, each a little behind where a family would have stood to sing. The heat rose steady through the boards. Wax softened and climbed like a small tide. The font overflowed a finger and then drew the water back, a breath taken through stone. The parish register had always been a weight I loved. Handwriting varies the way voices vary, and I had learned the graces and gracelessness of the man before me by the way their letters leaned. That night the book felt heavier. When I turned a page, the paper whispered not with friction, but with a wetness that did not blot. On a page near the back, where the recent dead share a margin with the living, a faint scrawl had begun. My name, first half letter only, then the outline of the second. It looked like a pencil had traced the shape with the lightest touch, waiting for my breath to fog it so it could finish. I'm not proud to tell you that I thought my voice might help them. I told myself that if I sang one verse, they would be soothed. It is a human thought, full of pride with a layer of mercy to cover the smell. I stood at the aisle and pitched my voice to their note and gave them a line from a hymn that did not belong to the dead. They folded around it in an instant, a shawl of sound that took my single thread and wove it. The floor lifted a fraction under my shoes. The air in my mouth cooled like a cellar. I stopped fast because stopping seemed like a door I could still close. The choir did not stop. It held the last vowel of my line and sang my name inside it in syllables that matched my accent. The tremor in the floor found the tremor at the base of my throat and lined them up. The bell rope brushed my sleeve as if a hand had missed mine and hit cloth. The candles tilted toward me as if a wind had passed that only they could feel. The font drew its water up to the lip and held it there in a round, perfect lens. I went one more time to the wall below, because sometimes you convince yourself action is defense. 5 bricks came out before the chisel began to sing when I tapped it. The space behind was not a corridor. It was a chamber that should not exist, round and low, made to amplify, not to house. The floor was not floor. It was the top of the earth, tamped and polite. The choir swelled when I opened the hole wider. The sound did not pour out. It poured in, as if the chamber were hungry and I had lifted a spoon. It called me by name again, not with love, not with malice, only with the confidence of a place that has set the table and knows you see the plates. The name scratched out in the register matched the length of the longest notes, and those notes did not end until the next name began. I traced the scraped letters, and my finger came away tipped with gray, as if very old graphite had chosen my hand to stain. The erased did not mind the smudge. They needed a living edge on their line. I tried to open the chapel doors again and found them willing only to watch. The latch moved without doing its job. The bell rope slid in my hands and rubbed my skin raw without raising a peal. The choir shifted to the exact cadence of my morning office for Wednesday. I have prayed these hours since seminary, and the pattern sits in my bones. It is not a holy feeling to hear your own devotion thrown back to you from the floor like an echo that has learned to beg. The hymn held my cadence and made it sweeter than it is when I make it, which is a cruel kindness. This is the point I tell you about the ticking thing I could not ignore. Every time the register turned a page by no hand, the floor shook a little longer. Every time a candle's wax bulged upward, a voice below lengthened its note by a beat. The font would not overflow until my hand neared it, as if it timed its tides to a pulse at my wrist. I watched the book turn to a page near the current year and stop on a line where my name could fit. The pencil lay across that line, like a small bridge waiting to be crossed. Choice is not often a dramatic gesture. It could be a breath held 3 beats too long. The choir leaned into the vowel of my first name and made the E into a ladder. I could climb or I could walk away. I opened my mouth and gave them the single note they had shaped for me. My voice did not echo. It did not climb the rafters. It went downward like a key lowered into a lock. The floor trembled in pleasure. The candle skirts swelled to a ridiculous grace. The font breathed once and then rested. I sang one verse. I stopped before the next. The hymn continued without me, but it carried my tone like a keepsake. In the chamber below, the air briefly cooled as if soil had inhaled. Above, in the cemetery, a ripple went through the grass like a sheet shaken smooth on a bed. Every stone leaned toward the chapel a degree, then stood straight again as if a nod had been requested and given. I know how this sounds to ears that do not want it. I would doubt me too if I were blessed with that distance. I stood very still. There's a strange peace when a place stops trying to persuade you because it believes you have already consented. The door kept its refusal but lost its tantrum. The bell rope lay on the floor and pointed toward the steps as if embarrassed. The register waited with no page open. The candle skirts shivered and then subsided. The hymn quieted to a hum, and the soil tremor softened to the memory of a steady pulse after the exertion passes. You could call it calm. I call it the pause in a lesson when the teacher is sure the student will ask to continue. At dawn, the doors opened as if we had not argued. Morning light must have been waiting outside because it entered with the speed of forgiveness. The font stood empty and dry. The candles looked ridiculous in their swollen skirts, like dancers after a performance. The bell rang once by itself, a small bell tone that lived at the edge of hearing, the kind you attribute to an echo. I stepped into the graveyard and found the stones had reset their posture, only a shade of dew missing on the side that had leaned toward the nave. I did not leave a note. I did not trust paper to hold what I had done. I walked the rows and greeted the oldest names and told them in my head that I had tried. The verses hummed under my feet like bees in a bench. The sound dipped and swelled under certain plots, never under others, and I made a mental map I will never draw because I do not want to hand anyone the wrong key. When I came back inside, the register had a smudge on the page where my name would go. Not a line, not ink. The dent a pencil makes as it thinks. People came to light candles after dinner that week. The wax behaved. No one but me noticed the slight bulge at the base when the verse from a funeral psalm hit the note the choir likes. Twice a woman paused after the Our Father and said she heard a second voice finish the last line. She stood near the front where the floor listens best. I felt small and large at once, which is a sin that wears humility like a costume. I put my hand on the font once more. It was warm from fingers, not from breath below. Then there is the matter of my name. I did not write it. The page acquired the half letters while I walked in the yard. Perhaps I brushed the pencil while turning. Perhaps the book is heavier than I thought because it carries what we do not. I erased the line with the corner of an envelope, and the fibers lifted like hair. The dent remained. The choir hummed at noon as if it noticed. I prayed aloud and did not let them set my tempo. They said it anyway, gentler this time, like a friend who has learned your step and wants to walk with you without making a show. I suppose you want the ending where I refused and triumphed. I do not own that ending. A month later, after night services for All Souls, the hymn rose higher than I had heard it, and the ground outside answered in a long soft roll that set loose a few pebbles from the wall. I sang once to steady the room, because people had begun to look at one another with a fear I know too well. My voice joined for a verse. The choir calmed. The chapel eased. One of the candles sank its skirt back toward the plate like a curtsy, and an old man thanked me for a piece he could not name. In the morning, the doors were open. The daylight came and mild. Parishioners watered the mums by the steps. No one asked where I had slept. No one asked why my shoes were white with the dust of limestone. On the following day, a flat stone appeared along the inner walk with no committee to vote for it. It bore my name in shallow letters that looked older than yesterday. The dates listed only a year. The year was this one. I stood over it and felt the choir hum under my feet in a tone that matched the key I had given them. They say there is no burial under that marker. They say it must be a mislaid stone. They say my name is now a prayer someone else can use. People standing there swear they hear someone singing far off when the wind has no business carrying a song. If you ask the grounds crew, they will shrug and tell you sometimes stones wander. If you ask me, I will tell you to listen to the wax when it lifts where heat does not live. Watch the font when it fills without a tap. Trust the tremor in the boards more than the words on the page. If you ever hear a hymn where a floor should not sing, keep your voice low. It is not always a plea for release, no matter how kindly it is shaped. Sometimes the choir is the ground learning to resonate with a throat it wants to borrow, and sometimes the throat says yes because the melody wears a memory you cannot refuse. Do not be angry at yourself if you sing one verse. Be careful how you end it. Some songs want to hold a vowel until you realize breathing is a choice you can give away. If you come to St. Elmo at dusk, light 2 candles and place one on the step and one on the rail. If the wax climbs, say a small prayer for me. If the font breathes, do not announce it. If the bell rope brushes your sleeve, tell it you already know the hour. The choir will be gentle if you are. They will listen if you listen. They will sing your cadence if you give it. And if you keep your peace, they will hum underneath and wait for the day you decide you like harmony better than time. Story 9. The dog who dug where no grave was the dog started digging where no grave was, claws flinging damp soil in a frantic blur, whining between breaths the way a child sobs in sleep. The empty patch sat between 2 old stones that leaned like tired shoulders. Weeds rattled in a cold wind, and the ground there felt wrong underfoot, too loose and a little warm, as if a living thing had rolled over and was settling again. Claire crouched with her notebook and whispered the time for the record. The dog dug faster. From the hole came a thin whistle, a faraway exhale, as if something under the roots had learned the shape of breath and wanted to practice it. Claire had a reason to stay. She was a volunteer with the preservation group that logged undocumented plots, and she needed this field to tell the truth. The last site had made her sound like a liar when she reported noises beneath a sealed crypt. People used the word unreliable with gentle faces, which is the worst way to hear it. If she brought proof now, the grant would hold, and so would her credibility. Her job tonight was simple on paper. Photograph depressions, log measurements, bring home coordinates. The dog, mud up to its chest, made the paper lie. She reached for the collar to pull the animal back, and her fingers found a brass tag, smooth with years. The engraving caught her light. Return to keeper. Claire frowned. The ring that held the tag was twisted and half snapped, as if something had tugged from below and won. She checked for a number. Only that phrase. Return to keeper. The dog growled when she touched the tag. The growl came out wrong, not from its throat, but from the hole, a faint echo that rode the whistle like a second note. She pulled her hand away. The collar slipped. The tag vanished into roots. She tried a gentle trick and dropped a biscuit beside the hole. The dog ignored it and bled onto the biscuit from both front paws. The pads had torn long before she arrived. The dog did not care. It dug in a rhythm that did not match the faint scratching from below. 2 beats above, 3 beats below, the 2 patterns stubborn as strangers. Claire's breath smoked and drifted toward the opening. The smoke sank without lifting again. She felt the wrongness as a pressure at the soft spot above her sternum, the place that always knows first. Claire thumbed her phone awake and opened the map. The screen pulsed, then dimmed to the amber of battery worry, though she had charged it in the car. She took one photograph, then another for insurance, and checked the results. The images showed dirt flying, paws blurred, her own boots on the fringe. The hole in the picture looked like a shadow printed on shadow. No depth, no shine of wet roots. The sound on the video was only wind. The thin whistle she heard with her ear had not been invited to the recording. The soil sank a hand's width in an instant, a swallow that surprised both Claire and the dog. The animal skittered back, snarled at the empty air, then jumped forward again as if apologizing to the earth. Claire made herself put a survey stake in the ground to mark the spot. The metal slid easily until it reached the depth of her knee. Then it fell. She did not push. It fell like a key down a stairwell. The sound it made was small and far away, a tick that suggested stone. She stared at the hole and tried to listen past her own heart. She wanted a reason she could file. Old ground can cave above a rotten root. Moles make tunnels. Settling happens. The dog tore deeper, and the whistle changed key, higher, a little eager. Claire took out the small hand shovel she carried because it made her feel official. She sank the blade near the edge. The earth softened at the touch of the metal. The shovel slid forward on its own and nearly tore from her hand. She wrenched it back and regained her balance with a laugh that sounded like someone else was telling it. She looked up for landmarks to fix her position in her mind. Cedar to the west, iron fence to the north, a blue stone with a lily carved on it to the east. She repeated them under her breath like a list you must not drop. The dog hit a tangle of roots and scrabbled, whining higher now. Claire reached in to break the roots clear and found the collar tag, trapped there, brass against damp wood. Return to keeper, it said again, and the K had been engraved twice, the second cut sharper and deeper, like a correction made by a hand that had not learned care. When the roots gave, the tag tumbled down. The dog yelped and leapt back 3 paces as if slapped. A gust rose from the opening, warm, wet, and stale. It smelled of mildew, iron, and something almost sweet, the way an old cellar dozes on a summer afternoon. The whistle deepened now, turned rounder, breathy as a flute played by someone with a fever. Claire wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and tasted loam and metal. Her phone buzzed a warning and died in her pocket like a heartbeat that had been allowed to rest. She remembered a photograph from the archive, brittle and brown. Men stood in their Sunday shirts in this same field, shovels in a neat line, faces serious, as if standing for a portrait before an argument. No coffins. The trench beside them was deep and empty, a long mouth in a winter ground. The caption had been written in ink that faded where the hand lifted for breath. Closing the keeper's hollow, it said. Claire had thought the word keeper meant caretaker, a man with keys and a coat. The dog began to whine at a pitch that made the air between her teeth ache. She took her lantern from the backpack because a flashlight felt too forward. Yellow light has mercy. She edged closer and lowered the lantern until the glow touched root and damp soil. The hole widened under her eyes. Not just depth, but shape. The earth did not slough like collapse. It curved and hollowed as if coaxed by hands. The chamber revealed itself as an oval, ribs pressed into the walls by something with patience. Scratches scored the earth, long parallel lines, some high, some low, as if different hands or different claws had tried at different times. The dog stopped whining. A low growl rose from the hollow. Words swelled inside it, barely formed. Return, it rasped. Return to keeper. Claire had a rule for herself after the crypt incident. When you hear words, repeat them softly while writing them, so later you can blame the repetition and not call an answer. She opened her notebook, balanced it on her knee, and whispered the phrase as she wrote. The lantern flame bowed toward the hole until glass kissed rim. The wick leaned and stretched, drawn by a pull she could feel in her own throat, a tiny tug that asked for the next breath. The hollow exhaled. The word Claire came out of the hole, wet and careful, and the light almost vanished into the mouth. She jerked the lantern back, heart sprinting now. The dog leapt between her and the hole as if to guard, then howled, a sharp ribbon of sound that pulled the cold wind into itself. At the word keeper, the howling cut off and the animal scooted backward, hackles up, eyes huge white crescents. It looked at her once, as if asking for a decision, then fled toward the cedar, running with a limp that had not been there. The field held its breath after the dog left, which told Claire that the dog had been a witness, not a guide. This is the part where a person like Claire would call for help. She tried. The phone woke just long enough to show a full signal, then all the bars emptied, then the screen went flat again. Her call log cleared as she watched. The last number, which had been her supervisor's cell, erased itself. Her thumb hovered above the redial memory she no longer had. She looked at her map pins to anchor herself. The pins blurred and slid, little red drops moving like fish behind glass. She closed her eyes and named the cedar, the fence, the lily stone, like a person about to step into deep water and wishing to carry names. She tried to drive a stake again. The second metal pin sank neat as a knitting needle into the edge, then vanished with a quiet gulp. She tried wood. The branch she had snapped struggled, bent, and was drawn in as if a fist had closed around it. She pushed the tripod leg into the soil beside the hole on more solid ground. The joint folded without asking her. She laughed again, soft and wrong, because a part of the mind likes order and hates to be told no by dirt. Claire forced herself to see. The chamber was not a grave. It had not been dug to hold a box. It had been shaped to hold a pause. The scratches inside the walls were evenly spaced like schoolwork, practice on clay. They cut upward and downward in polite lanes and ended before the roof. She leaned closer. The marks that rose toward the roof stopped short of the top by a finger's length, as if the thing that made them had occasionally remembered it did not need to reach. She whispered that thought and heard it sound like a dare. She imagined the old photograph again in present tense. The men closing the hollow without bodies, tamping the earth with shovels and fear. They had written keeper not because a person kept the cemetery, but because the hollow kept what it was told to keep. It kept watch on the dead. At some point it had scratched back when the living leaned on it. They had put it to sleep. They had ignored its breath. The dog had smelled that breath and dug where routine had taught everyone else to walk by. The hollow exhaled now, and Claire heard the word return again in the soil's thin rasp. The red herring had to be respected to be dismissed. Claire held the mass, grave theory in her mouth a while and let it soften. No bones were visible. No wood. No smell of rot under the mildew. The iron note was only the wet stone smell of earth that had not seen air in a long time. The shape was wrong for a trench. It was tidy. It expected a certain size. Claire measured the opening with the edge of her notebook and felt her hand shake at the fact the measurement was close to her own shoulder width. Point of no return is sometimes a decision your body makes while your mind is still counting. Claire leaned over the opening with the lantern steady in both hands and said her name calmly, as if leaving a message for herself on a bad day. The hollow said her name back with the wrong vowel, like a mouth practicing. Her flame bent toward the word and tried to go in. Claire knew better. She had second-degree burns from a camping stove that taught her what fire does when a small pressure asks for its hand. She began to pull back. The earth moved with the slow certainty of sleep rolling over. The rim under her palm softened and slid. The lid she had been kneeling on sagged and then broke. Claire dropped, bounced off a clay ledge that crumbled under her weight, and landed in a dark embrace that smelled like old rain and library basements. The lantern struck, rolled, and steadied on its side. The flame kept. Its light licked the chamber and showed the truth of shape. She was inside a lung that had learned to be a room. Claw marks striped the walls where her shoulders scraped. High on one side, low on the other, a spiral of scratches wound around the chamber like writing in a language that had no letters. Something metallic glimmered near her knee. She touched it with 2 fingers and felt the smooth curve of a collar too large for any dog she had seen, the brass tag still attached by a twist of wire. Return to keeper, the engraving said, the K cut twice. She held it up and the hollow breathed on it, fogging the metal with a slow, wet exhale. Claire tried to stand, but the floor shifted under her boots like a creature adjusting a blanket. The wall by her shoulder eased closer with patience. She planted her feet and pushed back. The earth pushed back gently, pleased to have found a pressure to mimic. The lantern's flame slanted toward the center as if gravity had been replaced by an opinion. The thin whistle rose, then fell like someone shaping a note with their tongue. Claire spoke up because fear likes conversation. "I am here to record," she said. The hollow answered with her last word only, repeating it as if tasting sounds. "Record, record, keeper." Her first practical thought was climb. She jammed her fingers into the scratches and set her toes into the shallower grooves. The earth held like a hand holds a bird. It let her rise to the first ledge, then softened under her toes just enough that she slid. She tried again on a different wall. The scratches that were older and packed tighter. Her boots found purchase and lifted her a foot. The wall exhaled a slow, warm breath, and the surface turned slick. Her foot slid to where it had been, as if the ground had measured her leg and practiced it. She tested a tool. The hand shovel would be a lever in an ordinary place. Here it sank where it touched. She thrust it into the seam where two layers of clay met. The shovel sank up to the hilt with a sound like a gulp. When she yanked, the handle came away free of the blade. The blade did not return, not even a shine of metal to admit its theft. The hollow exhaled, pleased with its new shape, and the exhale carried her name again in the soft rasp she now knew was not wind. Claire placed the lantern on the floor to keep her hands free and regretted it. The flame leaned farther, to a near angle now, like a flower to a sun that sits below the horizon. She hated the thought, but it arrived anyway. It had learned to draw breath. It had learned to draw heat. The dog had offered it claws and warmth. The old men with shovels had offered it names and fear. The tag told the rest. Anything that fell into the hollow belonged, and anything that belonged returned to the keeper sooner or later, not to a man, but to the hollow itself. She took out her notebook to leave a record. This is how a person argues with time when stone has decided. She wrote the field number, the coordinates she remembered: Cedar West, Fence North, Lily East. She wrote the depth approximately by her chin. She wrote the phrase "returned to keeper" with the K doubled to match the engraving. She pressed the paper flat on her thigh. The letters bled and blurred as if the paper had drawn in a breath of damp ink and decided to start over. She turned to the last page and found a sheet already stamped with a faint imprint of her handwriting. The words dim, as if the book had been closed on wet writing and the hollow had licked the copy away. The chamber began to fill. It began subtly. A pinch of soil here, a spoonful there, the way a person tucks in a blanket without waking a child. The ceiling dropped a finger. The floor rose a finger. The space adjusted itself around her in increments too polite to cause panic if you were not counting. Claire counted. 10 adjustments in 1 minute. 10 breaths. The whistle tuned higher and knit itself with the small groans a clay wall makes when it is working. Claire held her breath. The hollow held its sound. When she exhaled, it exhaled as if they were now committed to a duet. She tried one more climb and almost made the rim. Her fingers touched the cold, wet roots where the dog had torn them earlier. The soil beneath her shoulders softened again and eased her back. It was not spite. It was practice. The hollow wanted the shape to be right. She felt the start of a laugh and bit it off. Not because anything was funny, but because laughter would have given the chamber what it wanted: a rhythm to keep, a repeatable sound. She looked at the lantern and said, "Do not go out," and the flame bent toward the word out like a listener. Claire did the tiny, courageous thing. She leaned into the voice of the story and addressed you. If you find an empty place where the ground whistles, be smarter than this. Mark the spot with stone, not with metal. Tell someone before you touch the edge. Do not repeat the words you hear, not even to keep a record. The hollow will learn your pauses, and then your name, and then the way your breath turns when you are afraid. Do not kneel. Do not lean. If a dog digs and bleeds and refuses to stop, listen to the dog. The ground lifted another inch. The lantern toppled and rolled to her boot. The flame dragged itself along the glass like a tired animal. Claire took off her jacket, folded it, and slid it under the lantern to level it. The cloth warmed and steamed. The lantern steadied. She sat back and stared up through the small mouth of light that led to the night, the round song of sky she had fallen through. The stars were a salt she could almost throw at. The opening narrowed by a thumb's width while she watched. as if the place had decided a smaller pupil would help it focus. Time went strange. The hollow kept both counts. The quick measure of Claire's shallow breaths, and the slow measure of its own rise and settle. It spoke her name once more, and this time the vowel was almost right. It sounded like a person in a dark room tried to remember a tune learned years ago. Claire closed her eyes and tried to cry in a careful way that would not make her chest move. That plan did not last. She cried the way a person cries when a room tells them it has no doors. At dawn, hikers found the path near the cedar and saw a bag half covered in soil. Inside the bag were a folded jacket damp with steam, a map with mud fingerprints, a compass that pointed downward no matter how they turned it, and a notebook. The last page was blank except for 4 words written in an ugly hurry. Return to Keeper. A dog with clean paws sat calmly on the mound near the cedar, watching the hikers with the patience of a sad teacher. It wagged once when they said Claire's name and then looked back to the field as if waiting to be allowed. The search went on until the ground agreed to hold footprints. They brought scanners and poles and a man with a long pipe who claimed he could hear hollows. The pipe hummed at every grave and then sang a higher note at the empty patch. The man said there was a void and then said the void was closing. By afternoon, the soil lay smooth and indifferent. The cedar bore fresh scratches as if a desperate animal had tried to climb a tree that had done nothing wrong. The brass tag turned up in the grass near a blue stone with a lily carved on it. Return to Keeper, it said. The K had been cut twice to satisfy someone. Weeks later, the preservation group logged the field as a site with no record and a history of subsidence, which is a respectful way to write you cannot keep a place that wishes to forget. Claire's name sat in a file beside the words pending and volunteer. Her teammates returned with flags to mark hazards. The wooden stakes sank one by one as if swallowed, which might have been prank or might have been proof. The dog came back at dusk and lay down on the unmarked mound with its chin on its paws and slept without dreaming. The ground exhales sometimes, even now. Not often, only when the weather turns wet enough to make clay imagine itself alone. It lifts the soil a breath, a polite little swell that smooths itself. It is a habit that feels like a thread. If you ever hear a thin whistle where there should be only wind, measure it with your heartbeat, not with a tool. If the rhythms do not match, walk away. If you find a tag that says return to Keeper, take it to the office and let someone else hold the K that never cuts right the first time. Story 10. The Timekeeper of Row 9. I will not pretend the ticking started like thunder. It began like a rehearsal nobody invited me to, a single click out in the fog at 3:03 that first night, then a second click that arrived too soon, like a nervous speaker repeating the first word. If you have ever lain awake and listened to a house learn your insomnia, you know the flavor of a quiet that means to recruit you. The clicks came from Row 9, the long one that slants toward the creek where the stones list to the side as if listening too. I told myself gears do not grow from grass. I still went to listen. My name is Elias. I have given 38 years to this ground, and time has never forgiven me. The nurses called it a passing when my wife went while I was making tea, but I have never liked that word because it suggests somebody noticed. I had walked downstairs for 3 minutes. I have counted them, so often they shine. Since then, I keep the hours like a penitent. Row 9 began to tick at 3:03 exactly, 3 nights in a row. And if there is anything a man with my history will not do, it is ignore a clock that says it wants a keeper. The fog sat low that night, not the kind that drifts pretty for photographs, the kind that clots. It thickened along Row 9, so starkly you could see the seam where clear ground ended and breath began. That is the word that came to mind. Breath. The fog moved in and out as if the row were sighing. My lantern flame thinned with each tick and fattened when the gap between clicks stretched, like a slow inhale before a cough. If you have ever watched a room breathe without lungs, you know how easy it is to let your own pace be borrowed. The ticks drew me to an unmarked patch between 2 tilting stones, and the soil there shifted with each sound as if a heart were learning to be a metronome. I knelt. The earth felt cool on my palm. The third tick nudged a little mound of grit toward my wrist, and I told myself moles tunnel where they please. My lantern dimmed again on the next tick, then rebounded with a queer relief on the talk, and I heard a small squeak not from the candle, but from under the soil. I told myself a field mouse had opened a door. I looked for a door anyway. A pocket watch lay half buried near my knee. I would know that shape in the rain. My wife loved flea markets, and I have pulled enough broken watches out of boxes to recognize one with my eyes closed. I teased it free with 2 fingers and turned it toward the lantern. The crystal had cracked and fogged. The hands moved fast and wrong. They did not sweep forward. They hopped backward, not in seconds, in minutes, skipping like flat stones thrown in reverse across a pond. I listened. The watch ticked faster when my own pulse did, which felt like a joke at my expense. Row 9 is a line of old names and patient stone. That night the names had company. On 3 markers closest to the unmarked patch, faint scratches ran in tidy groups of 5, old tally marks cut so lightly you could mistake them for veining in the marble. The next set looked newer. The last set was so fresh I could rub grit from it with my thumb. The watch fluttered in my hand and tried to count me. I set it down because I did not enjoy the notion that anything here could read my body better than I can. The first disturbance became the dread loop. The clicks started regular. Then they stretched apart, a long, slow ooze between tick and tock, as if someone were teaching a student to hold. Now hold longer, then an impatient burst, 3 quick clicks that stole my lantern's strength and handed it back. I waited, because when time misbehaves, you do not chase it. You plant your boots and see if it wishes to choose you. With each long gap, the fog thickened. With each quick burst, it thinned. The rows seemed to inhale me. I could have radioed the office and had Jerry come down, make a bad joke, tell me to go home and sleep. The radio hissed, then shut itself. My wristwatch died as I checked it. The phone in my coat woke to a clean 3:03 and would not budge. Tap and swipe did nothing. It had finally learned to be the clock it wanted. The fog closed the path behind me and opened it ahead, narrowing to a corridor that admitted only a man and his apology. I do not panic when places show me their tricks. The ground has pulled worse. The pocket watch clicked and warmed to my palm. I pried the back with my thumbnail out of habit. The inner plate bore the faintest engraving, scored by a hand with more sentiment than skill. For the ones who wait, it read, and the last letter had been corrected twice like a man learning his alphabet by loving it too hard. The mechanism inside did not look quite like any I have serviced. Gears ran in odd counts. One will had teeth filed down and replaced with black grains that looked like sand glued with oil. The hands on the face jumped 3 minutes backward when I breathed too quick. An old repair trick came to mind, and I set the watch on a stone. The ticking did not like the stone. It dulled. I put on the soil. The sound sharpened, and my lantern protested. The flame thinned to a thread and then rebounded. The unmarked patch pulsed in sympathy. The tick lost me for a second and slipped, then caught itself and came back harder, like a man stumbling in a speech and plowing forward with an ugly confidence. The tally marks on the nearest stone brightened, as if wet. I leaned in and feel grit stuck to my cheek. If you have ever felt a place notice that you are listening, you know the next part. The soil parted without being dug. Not a collapse, a courteous shift. Surface slid aside and revealed not a coffin, not boards, not bone. It revealed more gears. Metal grown from dirt the way a tooth grows from gum. Grains of sand streamed between them like an hourglass emptied by stubborn fingers. The fog drew straight into the opening and came out colder. The tick belonged to that hidden mouth, and the mouth did not mind that I minded it. I said the red herring aloud to hear how foolish it would sound. Maybe a tinkerer had been buried with his watch, and the springs had survived the rot out of pure spite. The gears below did not look made by a hand, and they did not look recent. They looked like they had learned from rock. Some teeth were stone, some were root. The sand spilled and folded back as if counted and then returned. The watch on the soil clicked backward in a rhythm that matched me and then corrected me. It sped when I worried. It slowed when I lied to myself. I down to one knee, then the other, old man posture be damned, and lay my ear near the opening. Fog breath kissed my temple and retreated at the next tick. The sound poured up and around, not shrill, not kind, precise. Row 9 leaned toward the mechanism. The other rows kept their dignity. The tally marks along 9 stones breathed. That is what it looked like. The scratches inhaled shadow and exhaled a faint shine, 5 at a time, little litanies you could use or regret. My lantern dipped and fattened like a heart learning to be good again. I stepped along the row and the ticks followed. Past one stone, then the next. With each pace, the scratches on the nearest marker freshened by a hair. A softening crust peeled away from them, as if time itself were scraping sleep from its eyes. I stopped. A new mark etched itself on the far stone. Thin and pale, the first stroke of 5, and the sound that wrote it felt like a new pulse finding a vein. I took a careful step backward. The mark finished at 2. The watch spun 3 minutes back and tried to brag about it. Isolation is not always a door closing. Sometimes it is a corridor that decides to be longer. Row 9 stretched. The fog agreed. I could see the end of the row in my memory, the sycamore where the grass does better, the little curve into the next line. That night, the end of the row sat out of reach like a word I knew as a boy and cannot find when I stand in the kitchen. I took 20 steps. The row obliged me by giving 20 steps back, and somewhere inside those steps the tally scratches kept 1 for me. I turned my back to the gear mouth because I wanted to see if the sound would flinch. It did not. The ticks aligned with my breath and then demanded I align mine with them. If I lagged, the lantern thinned until I feared for the wick. If I hurried, the pocket watch rattled and clicked a stutter that shamed me. The fog sucked at the edges of my coat and tried to decide what shape the coat should be. Time here was not a river. It was a wheel with half its teeth grown from the names on these stones. The bargain presented itself without a salesman. I could walk until the tally for me reached 5. I could pace in place and let the marks try to count a man too stubborn to be measured. I could pretend none of this would hold until morning. The watch spared me posturing by spinning backward to a number I did not want to see. It showed my exact age in minutes, and the calculation did not need to explain itself. The tick leaned on the talk and tried to take a year. I felt the pull in my chest like a hand on a shirt collar. I said what a man who has failed once says. Take my hours, not theirs. I did not have a clear them in mind. Any future gossip at the diner. The children who run the stone ladder game along row 3 after school and suffer my scolding. Jerry with the bad jokes. The 2 new widows whose voices break when I place the flowers they brought. My wife's memory, which is a person who stands in my kitchen and corrects my grief with a look. Take my hours, not theirs. The tick agreed in the particular way a clock agrees. It did not change its mind. It adjusted its appetite. The fog thickened and arranged itself into a wheel you could sketch with your finger. Shadow spokes turned around me slower than the mind expects. The mechanism under the soil ground quietly, small adjustments in big stone. Headstones along the row made a low, grinding the way a machine sings when it humbles itself to work. The tally marks glowed, not bright, a heat color, as if they had remembered the forge that invented counting. My lantern held its thread of fire in a brave line. I held my posture because I could still choose that. Something older than the cemetery took my measure and found it adequate. That is the twist we deserve. The Timekeeper never wanted to stop. It wanted a caretaker. For years it had borrowed, where it could. A few minutes here, a year from a man who would not miss it until he looked up one morning and could not remember his daughter at 5. Each tally counted a bargain someone did not know he had made. I had given mine a shape. I had fixed a rule. Take mine. The gears below shifted beautifully, and I used a word like that because denial is a satin you wear on the way to work. The ticks match my heart calmly now. Not to steal it, to acquire it. The backwards watch settled to my earlier pulse, the sloppy human one, then taught it a discipline. Dikon inhale, dokon exhale, kause on retret. Repeat. I felt my breath move into the routine like a hand into a glove that remembers another hand. The fog wheel turned, and the spokes lined the path to the unmarked patch. The mouth under the soil did not open farther. It did not need to. It adjusted a tooth, and my memory loosened like old twine. I thought of my wife in the kitchen and could not fix the color of the mug. We bought the week we decided we had enough of match sets. Blue. No. Yellow with a chip. The chip might have been another year. The watch on the soil threw its hands farther backward, and the minute marks danced, small happy panic. I laughed once because the absurd needs a chaperone. The sound came out steady as the tick, and I knew that was the new part of me practicing. I licked my lips, and they tasted of iron the fog had learned to carry. I needed to choose the shape of this, so I would not be a man who tells a shapeless story. I walked back to the unmarked patch and set my lantern on the ground like a votive. The flame did not lay down for the tick. It took its place in the rhythm the way a singer does when a choir has already learned their parts. The tally marks on the nearest stones counted to 5 and waited. The scratches on the farther stones stuttered at 3. Row 9 moved its breath easier now. The count found an ending point I could feel in the soles of my feet. If you have ever wondered what it is to hand your life to a chore that outlives you, imagine this. You become a beat a place remembers. People walk row 9 at dawn and feel a pull down the hall of their ear. They pause and tell themselves the clock in their head is misbehaving. They take a careful breath and do not know why. They look at the old caretaker who seems to be part of the fog and ask him directions they already know. I stood in the thick and I practiced being that question long enough that the watch understood it had a man to count with. 3 minutes before first light, the mechanism under the earth made a sound like pins dropped on a tablecloth, small and decisive. The sand between the teeth stopped for 1 sweet second, like a lark holding its own song hostage. The backward watch froze, and the crack in its crystal made a small white R above the 12 like the letter had always been there under the spider. The fog loosened. The wheel dissolved into weather again. Row 9 became a place you could cross with breakfast in your hand. I did not leave it. At dawn, Jerry found my post empty. The kettle went cold on the hot plate. My log sat open to a page where I had written the hour and then scribbled something that looked like a list and then stopped. The backward watch lay by my lantern, both of them wet with a dew that had no business. He picked up the watch and said it made him tired. He set it down quickly and rubbed his chest the way men do when the world has leaned too near. He wrote a line in the office book that said Elias making rounds, and it is the kindest thing anyone has done for me. Visitors do not see much. They see a row that minds its business until 3:03 and then becomes a place where inside your head you can hear a tick that does not upset you because it proves you are not late. The tally scratches on the stones fade by noon and return after supper. Names look brighter at certain angles. A child once told his mother that when he stood on that row, a man asked him to breathe slow. She told him not to make up stories, and he cried about being told he had lied. In the office, I put down my pen and let the minutes slide under the door. If you come at night and your own heart is loud in your throat, stand midway down 9 and pretend you do not know what time it is. The fog will thicken and then remember you. The ticks will try you and you will pass or fail. If you fail, they will not hold a grudge. They will subtract what you can afford and give you back a story that you will not tell the way it happened. If you pass, I will keep your hour for you while you sleep and wake and love and miscount. This is what a keeper does when the job asks for 1 more year. Do not worry where I went. Worry what to do with the extra 10 minutes you find in your pocket on the bus, and the unexpected peace when the microwave reaches 0 and you do not mind it for a change, and the hush you hear behind your ear on clear evenings at 3 when no clock on your phone admits it. If you ever catch the backward hands in your reflection on a window, touch the glass. The breath on the other side will answer and settle and ask you to keep the time like a person who has finally learned not to look away. Caretakers are not saints. We are metronomes with a memory. Row 9 needed one. It recruited an old man who owed a minute and wanted to pay in order rather than in loss. I will walk that row until the tally scratches for me have dug a groove so deep the stone carton will not stand straight. Then another will come, because time is not a story that ends. It is a rehearsal you make gentler for the next voice, if you remember. Now it is nearly that hour, and the fog is beginning to gather in its old, careful way. If you can hear me, breathe on the tick and rest on the talk. If you cannot, that is all right. The row will keep the minute for you. I will keep the rest. And that brings us to the end of tonight's stories. Cemeteries hold more than stone and names. They keep questions that never stop whispering back. Which of these tales haunted you the most? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next Night of Shadows. Until then, keep your lanterns close, listen carefully to the silence, and remember, some graves are not meant to be walked past twice. Which of these tales haunted you the most? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this journey into the dark, don't forget to like and subscribe so you